Where did you get that watch? Jonathan Whitmore stepping closer. His eyes were fixed on Annie's wrist, where the old gold watch rested against her skin. The face had faded with age, but it had been carefully preserved. The outer rim caught a thin streak of light from the window. Where did that come from? He asked. Annie blinked. Sir? The watch. Jonathan's voice dropped. I'm asking where you got that watch. Annie looked down at her wrist. She was standing beside Lily Whitmore's study table, the quiet little girl she had been hired to tutor. Her folder was still pressed against her chest. Her coat was still buttoned. She had been inside the Whitmore mansion for less than 5 minutes, and yet the room had already grown colder than the air outside. Annie swallowed. I didn't take it. Jonathan's face tightened. That is not what I asked. I know, I asked where it came from. Annie's mouth opened, but the words caught in her throat. I didn't steal anything, she said too quickly. I only came here to tutor Lily. I'm just what? Annie looked at Lily, then at the housekeeper standing near the door, and finally back at Jonathan. I'm just trying to do my job properly, sir. Before Jonathan could answer, another man stepped in from the hallway. He was a few years younger than Jonathan, but dressed just as expensively. It was David Whitmore, Jonathan's younger brother. His eyes moved from Jonathan's face to Annie's wrist, and a thin trace of amusement appeared on his lips. What's going on? David asked. Jonathan still did not take his eyes off Annie. She is wearing a watch I recognize. David moved closer. Recognize how? Jonathan frowned. It looks like a family watch. David's expression changed at once. He looked Annie up and down. Not slowly enough for anyone to accuse him of being openly rude, but long enough for Annie to feel every small cut in his gaze. Her worn black flats, her simple blouse, her faded backpack, one strap stitched back together, the folder of lesson materials she had stayed up late preparing. At last, David's eyes stopped on the watch. So she stole it? He asked. Annie flinched. Lily sat up straighter. Uncle David. David glanced at his niece, then turned back to Annie. I'm asking a reasonable question. No, Annie said, her voice nearly unsteady. You're not. David raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon? You're not asking me anything, Liney said. You've already decided. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. David let out a small laugh, as if Annie had surprised him by being able to answer. That is a very nice watch, David said. Custom case, antique gold, handmade strap. Not something a person buys from a stand at the mall. He tilted his head. A girl like you couldn't afford a watch like that. Annie felt heat rise behind her eyes. Jonathan remained silent, and that silence hurt her more than she wanted to admit. Lily pushed her chair back. She came here to help me study. David looked at the girl with mild impatience. And perhaps she took something else before she came here. I didn't, Annie said. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she hated that it did. Jonathan glanced at David, then looked back at Annie. My brother is right about one thing. That watch is not ordinary. It is expensive, rare, and not something someone in your position would easily come by. Annie's lips parted, but he continued. If you can afford things like that, why are you here taking a tutoring job? That question wounded her more than David's insult. Annie looked straight at him. Because a person can own something meaningful and still need a paycheck. David gave a dry laugh. That sounds rehearsed. It isn't, Annie said quickly. I didn't take it. I already told you, I didn't take it. Jonathan's face remained unreadable. Annie felt the room closing in around her. I don't know what you think happened before I walked in here, Annie said, trying to keep her voice calm. But I did not come into your house with a plan. I did not steal from you. I did not steal from anyone. David folded his arms. Then explain why it is on your wrist. I am trying to explain, Annie said, but every time I open my mouth you look at me as if the conclusion has already been made. Jonathan did not answer. Annie looked down at the folder in her hands. On the first page, she had written Lily's name in blue ink. Beneath it were 3 simple questions to begin the lesson. Which subject feels hardest for you? What kinds of books do you like? What helps you learn better when you feel stuck? Now, it all seemed painfully naive. Her eyes burned, but she forced the tears back. I didn't think my first day of tutoring would begin with being accused of stealing, she said. I thought I was coming here to help a little girl with her homework. Lily lowered her head. For a moment, even David said nothing. Jonathan's expression shifted slightly, but not enough to become kindness. Then tell me, he said, where did you get it? Before Annie could answer, a woman's voice came from the archway. "Jonathan, what is going on?" A woman entered the living room. She wore a cream blouse and dark trousers, her hair pinned neatly at the back of her neck, her phone still in her hand. Annie recognized her from the family photographs in the hallway. It was Victoria Whitmore, Jonathan's wife. Victoria looked from Jonathan to David, then to Annie. Her eyes stopped on the watch. Jonathan said, "I believe she is wearing a watch that belongs to this family." Victoria's face tightened immediately. She stepped closer. Then she must have taken it. Annie held her breath. "Ma'am, I didn't." Victoria raised a hand to stop her before she could finish. "A watch like that costs more than some people make in a year. Do you expect us to believe you simply walked in here wearing it by coincidence?" "I didn't walk in here by coincidence," Annie said, her voice trembling. "I was hired to tutor your daughter." Victoria's eyes moved over Annie's clothes, her old shoes, her backpack, and the folder she held tightly to her chest. "Exactly. And if you can afford such an expensive watch, why would you need a tutoring job?" David nodded, as if someone had finally said exactly what he had been trying to say. "That is what I was trying to point out." Lily stood, small but tense. "Mom, she hasn't even taught me yet." Victoria gave her daughter a sharp look. "Lily, this has nothing to do with your lesson." Annie pressed her lips together. Her throat ached. The tears she had been trying to hold back now began to fall too quickly. "I did not steal it," she said again. "I don't know how many ways I can say that." Victoria's eyes returned to the watch. She seemed ready to speak again, but then she stopped. She frowned. "Wait," Victoria said slowly. Jonathan turned to her. "What?" Victoria leaned closer, staring at the gold rim. "That watch looks familiar." David frowned. "Of course it does. Jonathan just said it looks like a family watch." "No," Victoria said more quietly. "I mean, I've seen it before." Her eyes returned to Annie, sharper than before. "Explain yourself. Right now. Where did you get it?" At that moment, something inside Annie broke. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I have been trying to explain," she said, her voice shaking. "Since the moment I stepped into this house, everyone has been talking over me. I came here for my first tutoring session, and before I could even sit down, I was accused of stealing." No one moved. Annie quickly wiped the tear away, ashamed that she had cried. But she kept speaking, because if she stopped now, they would use her silence against her. "Every time I open my mouth, someone says I must have stolen it. Someone says I couldn't afford it. Someone looks at my shoes, my bag, my job, and decides those things tell them everything about me." Victoria's expression changed, though Annie could not tell whether it was shame or irritation. "I did not steal your watch," Annie said, her voice almost pleading. "I did not steal anyone's watch. I did not come here to be humiliated in front of a child I was supposed to help." Lily lowered her head. Jonathan looked at his daughter, then back at Annie. Annie gripped the folder so tightly that the corners of the papers bent. "I was nervous before I came here," she said. "My mother told me to be polite, to do my best, and to remember that work is still work, even if the house is bigger than anything we've ever known. So I came early. I brought lesson plans. I brought practice exercises. I came here ready to work." Her voice trembled again, but this time she did not stop. "And all of you looked at me as if I had already done something wrong." David shifted his weight but said nothing. Victoria looked away first, if only for a second. Jonathan pressed his lips together. He seemed trapped between anger, suspicion, and something uncertain beginning to creep in. He still wanted the truth about the watch. Clara Bennett, the housekeeper standing near the door, lowered the tray in her hand slightly. Her eyes rested on Annie with quiet concern. "Miss Carter," Clara said gently, "would you like to sit down?" Annie shook her head. "No, ma'am. If I sit, they'll think I'm too afraid to stand." The sentence struck the room harder than she expected. Lily took a small step away from the table. "I don't think that." Annie looked at the girl. Lily's voice was very small, but it was the first kind thing anyone in that family had said to her since the questioning began. "Thank you," Annie whispered. Jonathan took a slow breath. "No one meant to frighten you." Annie looked at him with wet eyes. "Then why do I feel like everyone is waiting for me to confess to something I didn't do?" He had no ready answer. David cleared his throat. "This is becoming far too emotional. We still don't know where she got the watch." Annie turned to him. "Because you keep interrupting me before I can tell you." Victoria folded her arms. "Then say it." Annie looked at each of them. David, with his suspicious eyes. Victoria, with her confident disbelief, Jonathan with his heavy caution, Clara with her quiet concern, Lily with the confusion and compassion of a child. Then Annie looked down at the watch. The gold rim caught the light again. She lifted her head. "I will explain," Annie said, "but I will not do it if you keep calling me a thief between every sentence." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. David opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victoria's fingers tightened around her phone. Lily looked from Annie to her father. The whole room waited. The watch ticked softly on Annie's wrist, steady and small, the only thing still calm in a room full of judgment. Jonathan looked at Annie for a long time. The silence in the living room had become more uncomfortable than the accusations from moments earlier. Victoria still held her phone at her side. Her fingers tightened around the case. David stood near the fireplace, his arms folded across his chest, his expression still full of suspicion. Mrs. Clara stood by the door, the tray in her hands lowered a few inches, and Lily sat beside the study table, silently watching the adults with eyes that were both confused and frightened. Annie kept her head high, but inside, she was using every bit of strength she had not to turn and run. She could leave, but if she left this room now, they would keep telling the story they had built from the beginning. A poor black tutor had walked into the Whitmore mansion with a stolen watch on her wrist. At last, Jonathan spoke. "No one is going to call you anything between sentences now. No one is going to interrupt you halfway through. Explain." Annie looked at him. "That still doesn't sound like listening." Jonathan pressed his lips together. "I am listening." David exhaled softly through his nose. "Then she should start talking." Annie turned toward him. "You have already said plenty, Mr. Whitmore." David's eyebrow lifted. He looked almost amused, but beneath that amusement was clear irritation. "Careful? Careful about what?" Annie asked. "My tone? My words? My face? I have been careful since the moment I got out of the car at your gate." Jonathan cut in. "David." Just one word, but it was enough to make David stop. Victoria stepped closer. Her voice was softer now, but not kinder. "Miss Carter, you have to understand how this looks." Annie almost smiled, but there was too much pain in it. "Ma'am, I understand exactly how you think it looks. That is the problem." Victoria's face stiffened. Mrs. Clara spoke gently. "Let the girl speak." David turned toward her. "Clara, this is family property. Then the truth should matter even more to this family," Clara replied. Her voice was not loud, but every word landed in the room with clear weight. Jonathan's eyes shifted to Clara, then back to Annie. "Tell us what happened." Annie took a deep breath. She looked down at the watch on her wrist one more time. "It happened 2 years ago," she began. "I was on my way home from the library. There's a pharmacy on Harris Street, near the bus stop. I stopped there because my mother told me to buy cough drops before I came home." Jonathan did not interrupt. Annie continued. "It was starting to get cold, not freezing, but cold enough that people were walking fast. I saw an elderly woman near the parking lot. She was holding a paper bag from the pharmacy and a purse. 2 men were walking up behind her." Victoria's eyes flicked briefly toward the watch. "They were dressed like anyone else," Annie said. "Hoodies, jeans. One of them grabbed her purse. The other blocked her way. It happened so fast." She stumbled. Her bag of medicine fell, and the bottles rolled under a parked car. Lily's hand tightened around the back of her chair. But she stayed silent. Annie swallowed. Everyone saw it. A man near the gas station looked over and kept walking. A woman got into her car and locked the door. I don't blame them. I was scared too. I just stood there with a backpack full of books, thinking surely some adult would help. She paused. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. But no one did. Annie drew in a breath. So I yelled. I yelled as loudly as I could. I told them I was calling the police, even though my phone was almost dead. I threw my backpack down near them, not at them, just hard enough to make noise. One of the men turned to look at me, and that moment gave the woman 1 second to get away. David shifted slightly, as if the story was moving in a direction he did not like. I ran to her, Annie continued. I helped her up. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold my hand. I got her inside the pharmacy, and the cashier locked the door until the 2 men left. She looked down for a moment, that's all. It wasn't like a movie. I didn't fight anyone. I didn't save the whole world. I just didn't leave her alone. Jonathan looked at the watch, then back at Annie. Something on his face changed slightly. Victoria asked, "And that woman gave you this watch?" "Not right away," Annie said. First, she sat in the chair by the blood pressure machine because she was dizzy. The cashier gave her water in a paper cup. She kept saying she was fine, but her hands were shaking badly. Mrs. Clara lowered her eyes. Annie noticed something strange on the older woman's face. Maybe recognition, maybe sadness. She asked my name, Annie said. I told her I was Annie. Just Annie. She asked if she could call someone for me, but I said no. My mother was working a double shift, and I didn't want to scare her. Jonathan's voice lowered. Why didn't you stay and wait for the police? Annie looked at him. Because I was afraid. Of the police? Of everything, she said. Of getting home late. Of making my mother worry. Of those men coming back. Of standing there and having to explain why I was involved. I know that may not make sense to you. Jonathan did not answer. Annie gave a small nod, as if his silence had confirmed what she had just said. So when the cashier said the police were coming, I told the woman I had to go. And she gave you the watch, David said. But this time, his voice was less mocking. Annie turned to him. She took it off her wrist and put it in my hand. I told her no. I told her I couldn't accept something like that. I didn't even know how much it was worth, but I knew it was too expensive. Lily asked very softly, what did she say? Jonathan turned toward his daughter, seeming ready to stop her. But Lily's question was not rude or childish. It was quiet and sincere. He let her ask. For the first time, Annie's expression softened. She said, sometimes people hold on to the wrong things and forget to value the right ones. I didn't understand what she meant. Then she said, you saw an old woman in danger, and you stepped closer when everyone else stepped away. Mrs. Clara gently set the tray down on the side table. Annie continued, I still tried to give it back, but she held my hand very tightly. She said, keep it, not because it is expensive, because I want you to remember what you did when fear told you to turn away. Victoria's hand rose to her throat, but she said nothing. Annie looked at Jonathan. That is how I got it. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then David said, and we're supposed to believe this woman just happened to be connected to this family? Annie's face became serious. I didn't know she was connected to your family. I didn't know this house existed. I didn't even know your name until the tutoring center sent me the address. Jonathan asked, did she tell you her full name? No. Did she give you a business card? No. A phone number? No. David spread his hands. You see the problem. Annie looked at him wearily. The problem is that nothing I say is convincing enough if it doesn't come with paperwork. In this house, David said, expensive things are documented. In my life, Annie replied, kindness doesn't always come with a receipt. Mrs. Clara looked up at her. Victoria still was not finished. Then why wear it here? On your very first day? If you knew it looked expensive, why not leave it at home? Because it matters to me, Annie said. I wear it when I'm nervous. Were you nervous about coming here? Annie looked around the living room. Don't you think I should have been? The question hung in the air, clear and uncomfortable. Lily looked at her father. Dad, can we check? Maybe Grandma wrote something about it. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Lily, she wrote everything down, Lily said. You always say that. David shook his head. We cannot turn this into a treasure hunt because the tutor has a story. Mrs. Clara stepped forward. Mr. David, your mother did keep journals. Jonathan's face stiffened. Victoria turned to Clara. Do you think there could be something? I don't know, Clara said. But I remember the day Mrs. Whitmore came home looking very strange. I remember she asked me whether brave people are born brave or whether they become brave because no one else steps forward to protect the weak. Annie held her breath. Clara looked at her. This time, there was no doubt left in her eyes. At the time, I thought it was a strange question. Jonathan turned toward the hallway, where family portraits lined the wall. Annie followed his gaze. In one large photograph, an elderly woman stood beside Jonathan. She wore a small but warm smile, one hand resting lightly on his arm. The watch was not clearly visible in the photograph, but Annie recognized something else. The posture, the slight lift of her chin, the calm, familiar eyes that had once looked at her outside the pharmacy. Annie's throat tightened. That's her, Annie said before she could stop herself. Jonathan turned sharply. What? Annie nodded toward the photograph. The woman in that picture. If this scene touched your heart, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about truth, courage, and second chances. For the first time that afternoon, Jonathan did not answer immediately. David stared at the portrait, then at Annie. Victoria's face went so pale that her makeup could not hide it. Lily looked at the picture of her grandmother, then back at the tutor she had known for less than an afternoon. Mrs. Clara whispered, "Mrs. Eleanor." Tears rose in Annie's eyes again, but this time the feeling was completely different. It was not only humiliation, it was a sorrow deeper and larger than herself. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't know who she was." Jonathan took one step toward the portrait, then stopped. David cleared his throat, but even he no longer sounded certain. "A photograph doesn't prove." "No," Jonathan said. Everyone turned to him. He was still looking at the portrait. "No, it doesn't prove everything." Then he turned back to Annie. "But it proves we need to know more." Annie hugged the folder tightly to her chest, still standing in the same place where she had been since the first question was asked. She was tired. Her feet hurt. Her face was hot from crying. She wanted her mother. She wanted to sit on the bus and go home. She wanted the day to start over and become the simple tutoring session she had hoped for. But the watch kept ticking on her wrist, steady as a small witness. Jonathan looked toward Clara. "Where are my mother's journals?" Clara hesitated. "In her room, sir. The blue ones are in the nightstand drawer. The older ones may still be on the writing desk." Victoria said, "Jonathan, are you sure?" He looked at his wife, then at David, then at Annie. "No," he said. "I'm not sure of anything anymore." Jonathan started toward the hallway, then stopped and turned back. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice softer than before. "If you want, you may come with us." Annie looked at Lily, then at Clara, then at the photograph of the woman from the pharmacy. She still did not trust Jonathan, but she trusted the woman who had once held her hand and told her not to let fear decide who she would become. Annie nodded. "I'll come," she said. "But the watch stays on my wrist." Jonathan looked at the watch one more time. Then he gave a small nod. Jonathan led the way down the hall. But he did not walk with the certainty Annie had seen in him earlier. His steps were slower now, as if every framed photograph on the wall had become a question. Annie followed a few feet behind him, with Lily at her side and Mrs. Clara close enough to make sure no one treated her like she was being marched somewhere. Victoria came after them, quiet for once, her phone gripped in one hand but unused. David trailed behind, looking irritated by the fact that the room had not settled back into his version of the truth. The hallway seemed longer than it had when Annie first arrived. Family portraits lined the cream-colored walls. Jonathan as a young man in a tuxedo. Victoria in a formal dress at some charity dinner. Lily as a little girl holding a ribbon from a horse show. And there, again and again, the older woman from the pharmacy appeared in silver frames. Eleanor Whitmore, smiling in gardens, seated at holiday tables, standing beside Jonathan at what looked like a hospital fundraiser. Annie slowed near one photograph. Eleanor was wearing a pale blue coat in it, the same soft color Annie remembered from that day outside Harris Pharmacy. Her hair was pinned at the back of her neck. Her smile was gentle, but there was a little sadness in her eyes, the kind Annie had noticed even before the robbery, when the woman had tried to stand and insisted she was all right. Lily noticed Annie staring. "That was Grandma's favorite coat." Annie nodded. "She had it on that day." Jonathan stopped. He turned around, and for a moment his face was unreadable. "You remember her coat?" "Yes," Annie said. "It had a loose button near the collar." Mrs. Clara drew in a quiet breath. "I sewed that button back on the next morning." David looked from Clara to Annie. "A loose button doesn't prove anything. Anyone can look at a picture and make up a detail." Annie turned to him. She was tired of his voice, tired of the way he kept reaching for doubt like it was a glass of water. "The picture doesn't show the loose button." David opened his mouth, then looked back at the photograph. The coat was smooth, the collar turned away from the camera. Nothing in the frame showed what Annie had just described. Victoria looked down. Jonathan said nothing. He continued toward the staircase. They climbed to the second floor, where the air felt different, quieter and warmer. The noises from downstairs faded behind them. Annie heard the soft brush of Lily's shoes on the runner, the small click of Victoria's heels, the heavier steps of the men behind her. She held her folder against her chest, though the papers inside no longer mattered. Lily's lesson had become something else. At the end of the hall, Jonathan stopped before a closed door. His hand went to the brass knob, then paused. No one pushed him. Even David had the sense to stay quiet. Mrs. Clara spoke gently. "Sir, I can open it." Jonathan shook his head. No, he turned the knob himself. The door opened into a bedroom kept too carefully, not dusty, not neglected, but preserved. A pale quilt lay smooth across the bed. A reading chair sat near the window with a folded blanket across one arm. There was a small table with a lamp, a Bible, and a pair of glasses. On the dresser sat a silver hairbrush, a bottle of perfume, and a framed picture of Lily, as a child missing one front tooth. Annie stayed near the doorway. It felt wrong to step in too quickly. This was not just a room. It was the shape someone left behind. Lily walked in first, quietly. "Dad never lets anyone come in here." Jonathan's face tightened, but he did not correct her. Victoria moved to the dresser and touched the perfume bottle with 2 fingers. She wore this every Sunday. Mrs. Clara went to the bedside table. Mrs. Whitmore kept her recent journals here. The older ones were in the writing desk. Jonathan remained by the door, one hand still on the knob. Annie saw then that his anger downstairs had been easier for him than this. Anger gave a man something to do with his hands. Grief did not. Clara opened the top drawer, then the second. Inside were several small journals, each with a cloth cover and a year written on a paper label. She lifted a blue one and looked at the date. "This would be the year," she said. David stepped forward. "Are we really doing this? Reading private journals because a stranger says she helped Mother?" Clara looked at him with more firmness than Annie expected. "Your mother asked me once to remember the girl if she ever came up again." David frowned. "Why would she say that?" "I don't know," Clara said. "Maybe because she knew this family forgets things that make it uncomfortable." Victoria glanced at Jonathan. He did not defend the family. That alone felt like a shift. Clara handed the journal to him. Jonathan stared at it. His thumb moved over the blue cloth cover. For several seconds he only held it. Annie wondered when he had last touched something his mother used every day. She wondered if grief was different in a mansion. Maybe the rooms were bigger, but the missing person still left the same kind of empty chair. Jonathan opened the journal carefully. The first pages were ordinary. Weather notes. A reminder to call Lily after school. A line about tomato soup being too salty. A note about a church friend's hip surgery. The small details made Eleanor feel more real to Annie. Not like the rich woman everyone kept circling, but like the old lady who had sat in a plastic pharmacy chair and worried more about Annie getting home than about her own shaking hands. Jonathan turned pages until Clara leaned closer. "Late October," she said. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because I had made chicken pot pie, and she never ate it. Annie almost smiled at the detail. Chicken pot pie. Something warm waiting in a house like this while she had gone home to leftover rice and canned green beans. 2 different lives, crossing for 10 frightened minutes outside a pharmacy. Jonathan found the date. His eyes moved over the page. No one breathed loudly. Then his face changed. Victoria whispered, "Jonathan?" He did not answer at first. His jaw worked once, as if the words had caught there. Lily stepped closer. "Dad?" Jonathan read aloud, his voice lower than before. "I was careless today. I thought I could stop for my prescription without asking Marcus to drive me. I wanted one afternoon where I was not treated like glass." Marcus, Annie thought, the driver from downstairs. So Eleanor had known what it meant to want a little freedom from being watched. Jonathan continued, "2 young men tried to take my purse outside Harris Pharmacy. I fell. Several people saw and did what frightened people do. They protected themselves." David looked away toward the window. Jonathan's hand tightened around the journal. "Then a girl came running," he read. "A young black girl with a school backpack and more courage than anyone else in that parking lot. She shouted, made enough noise to scare them off, and helped me inside. Her hands were shaking. She kept asking if I could breathe." Lily looked at Annie. Annie's throat tightened. Jonathan read more slowly now. "Her name was Annie. I did not get her last name. She left before the police came. I cannot blame her. A child should not have to be brave, and then be questioned for surviving her own bravery." The room went very quiet. Annie blinked hard. She had not known Eleanor understood that part. She had thought the old woman might have been offended when Annie left so quickly. She had carried a small guilt for 2 years, wondering whether she should have stayed longer, whether she had seemed rude. whether she had abandoned someone she had just helped. But Eleanor had understood. Jonathan lowered the journal a little. His eyes did not meet Annie's. Victoria's face had softened, but she looked troubled too, as if her earlier words were now returning to stand beside her. David cleared his throat. "It says Annie. There are many girls named Annie." Mrs. Clara's eyes flashed. "David, I'm just saying what everyone is thinking." "No," Lily said. Everyone turned to her. She stood near the bed, small and pale, but her voice was steady. "You're saying what you want to think." David stared at her, surprised. Jonathan looked at his daughter for a long second, then turned another page. "There's more," he said. His voice had changed. It sounded less like a man searching for a mistake and more like one afraid of finding himself inside one. He read again. "I gave her the gold watch. She refused twice. Such a serious child, so careful not to take what she had not earned. I told her courage should not leave empty-handed. She looked at me as if adults had not often thanked her properly." Annie closed her eyes for a second. That sentence hurt because it was true in a way she had never said aloud. People thanked her mother for working long shifts at the hospital, but not enough. People thanked Annie at school when she helped other students, but mostly because it was convenient. Eleanor had thanked her like the act mattered. Jonathan turned the page, then stopped. His voice lowered further. "I hope I see her again. If Jonathan ever meets her, I pray he will be kind. He has a good heart under all that armor. But sometimes he mistakes suspicion for wisdom." Victoria looked at her husband. Jonathan shut his eyes briefly. David said nothing now. Annie did not feel triumphant. She had imagined, maybe, that if proof ever came, it would feel like standing taller. Instead, it felt heavy. Proof should not have been necessary for basic. Jonathan closed the journal halfway, then opened it again as if he owed the page his full attention. "There is one more line," he said. He read it. But this time his voice nearly broke. "If the watch is ever questioned, let it be known clearly. I gave it to Annie freely, with gratitude and a clear mind." No one spoke. Outside the window, the late afternoon light had softened against the lawn. Somewhere downstairs, a clock chimed the hour. Annie heard each note as if it came from far away. Jonathan lowered the journal. His eyes finally met hers. For the first time, he did not look at the watch first. He looked at Annie. "I owe you," he began, then stopped. Annie waited. The apology did not come. Not yet. His pride, his grief, his shame, whatever held him back, still stood between them. But it was weaker now. She could see that. David rubbed a hand across his mouth. "We still need to confirm the watch itself." Victoria turned on him softly. "David, stop." "No," Annie said. They looked at her. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, then straightened. "Let him say it. Let all of you say whatever you still need to say, because I don't want anyone walking out of this room thinking maybe I fooled you." Jonathan's face tightened with something like pain. Annie held out her wrist, but not toward him. She turned it slightly so the watch caught the light. "You can check it," she said. "You can read numbers, call lawyers, open drawers, whatever you need. But I want something understood first." "What?" Jonathan asked. "My honesty was not born when you found proof." The words settled over the room. Mrs. Clara looked down, and Lily stared at Annie as if she had just taught her something no workbook could hold. Jonathan nodded once, slowly. "You're right," he said. It was still not enough, but it was the first step that did not sound like an accusation. Clara moved toward the writing desk near the window. "There may be a receipt, or a record of the watch's serial number." Mrs. Whitmore kept documents in the lower drawer. Jonathan looked at Annie. "Will you allow us to compare it?" Annie studied him. The question mattered. Allow. Not demand. Not take it off. She nodded. "I'll hold it." He accepted that without argument. And in that small permission, the room changed again. Not healed, not forgiven, but changed. Clara opened the lower drawer of the writing desk, and the old brass handle clicked in the quiet room. Inside were envelopes, cards, and folded papers tied with a blue ribbon. Annie stood beside Lily, the watch still on her wrist, while Jonathan stepped closer to the desk with the journal in his hand. Whatever they found next, one thing had already become clear. The story had never belonged only to the watch. It belonged to what the Whitmore family had been willing to believe about the girl wearing it. Mrs. Clara untied the blue ribbon with careful fingers, the way someone handles things that have outlived the person who saved them. The papers inside were not arranged like legal files. They were personal things: old receipts, appointment cards, small notes written in Eleanor Whitmore's slanted handwriting, a church bulletin folded around a dried leaf, and a photograph of Lily at a school concert. Jonathan stood beside the desk with his mother's journal still open in one hand. He looked as though he wanted to help Clara search, but did not quite know how to touch the past without damaging it. David grew impatient first. There should be a certificate. Watches like that come with documentation. Victoria gave him a look. David, not everything Mother kept was organized for your convenience. I'm only saying if we're going to settle this, we should settle it properly. Annie heard the word properly and almost looked away. Properly, in this house, seemed to mean only one thing, not by her word alone. She stood near Lily, her wrist held close to her body. The watch ticked quietly beneath her sleeve. She had offered to let them check it, but even that felt strange now. Not because she had anything to hide, because the more proof they found, the more it showed how little her own voice had meant. Lily glanced up at her. Are you okay? Annie gave a small nod. I'm standing. That's not what I asked. For the first time since entering the bedroom, Annie almost smiled. No, I'm not really okay. Lily looked down at the carpet. I'm sorry. You didn't accuse me. I didn't stop them either. Annie studied the girl. Lily was young, but not empty-headed. She had seen more than the adults wanted her to understand. Sometimes, Annie said softly, the first time you see something unfair, you don't know what to do with it. The next time, you know faster. Lily nodded, holding that sentence like a note she wanted to remember. At the desk, Clara found a narrow envelope, yellowed at the edges. She turned it over and read the handwriting on the front. Watch service records. Jonathan reached for it, then stopped himself and looked at Annie. May I? The question was small, but everyone noticed it. David's mouth tightened. Victoria lowered her eyes. Annie gave one nod. Clara handed Jonathan the envelope. He opened it and pulled out a folded receipt from a jeweler in downtown Chicago. The paper was old but preserved. Jonathan scanned it, then passed it to Victoria. This is the service record from the year before Mother died. Victoria read the line. Gold Whitmore custom wristwatch. Outer engraving. Eleanor Whitmore. Serial number. She stopped and looked toward Annie's wrist. David stepped forward. Good. Now we check the number. Annie held up her hand before he came any closer. Not you. David stopped. His face hardened. Excuse me? You've already decided enough things about me today. Jonathan looked at his brother. David, stay where you are. David stared at him, surprised. You're serious? Yes. For a moment, the brothers looked at each other with years of family habit between them. David was used to pushing. Jonathan was used to allowing it when it served him. But now something had shifted, and David did not like where it left him. Mrs. Clara opened a small drawer in the writing desk and took out a magnifying glass with a brass handle. Mrs. Whitmore used this for reading prescription labels. She offered it to Annie first. Annie looked at her, then accepted it. The gesture mattered more than Clara probably knew. Annie sat on the edge of the reading chair only after Clara nodded toward it, not as if she were being permitted to rest, but as if she had a right to use the chair while the truth was being handled. She unfastened the watch strap slowly. No one moved. Even David stayed back. The watch came loose from her wrist and rested in her palm. Without the warmth of her skin beneath it, it looked smaller, older, almost fragile. Annie turned it over, searching for the tiny notch near the back casing. She had never opened it in front of so many people before. When she did open it at home, it was usually at night, after homework, when her mother was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Jonathan watched her hands. They're shaking, Lily said, not to embarrass her, but because she noticed. Annie breathed out. I know. Jonathan's face tightened. You don't have to rush. Annie gave him a short look. I'm not rushing for you. He accepted that. The back of the watch clicked open. Annie turned it toward the light from the window. Inside, along the inner rim, was a tiny engraved number. Clara leaned in but did not touch. Victoria moved closer beside her. Jonathan held the paper. Annie read the number slowly. Jonathan checked it against the receipt. The room waited. His eyes moved once, twice. from the paper to the watch and back again. Then his shoulders dropped. Barely, but enough. It matches, he said. Victoria closed her eyes for a second. David looked irritated, then uneasy. That proves it's her watch. It doesn't prove she meant to give it away. Annie's head lifted. Your mother wrote that she did. David looked at her. People write things when they're emotional. Clara turned on him. And people say cruel things when they are cornered. The words were not loud, but they struck him cleanly. David's face flushed. I'm trying to protect this family. No, Clara said. You are trying to protect being right. Jonathan looked at the service record again. Enough, David. David scoffed. So that's it? A journal entry and a serial number? And suddenly we trust her? No, Jonathan said. His voice was low now. A journal entry, a serial number, a matching account, a detail about mother's coat no photograph showed, and the fact that my mother herself wrote Annie's name. David had no answer ready. Annie should have felt relieved. Part of her did, but another part felt tired in a way proof could not fix. She looked at the watch in her palm and thought of Eleanor pressing it into her hand outside the pharmacy, saying something Annie had repeated in her mind every time she felt small. Keep it, not because it is expensive. Victoria stepped closer, her face no longer sharp. Annie. Annie looked up. Victoria seemed to struggle with the shape of the next words. I should not have said what I said downstairs. David shifted, as if uncomfortable with apology happening so near him. Victoria continued. I saw the watch. I saw you. And I made an assumption. Annie waited. Victoria added, it was wrong. The apology was not warm, but it was direct enough to matter. Annie nodded once. Thank you for saying that. Victoria looked as if she had expected either tears or anger, and did not quite know what to do with Annie's steadiness. Jonathan still held the journal and receipt. He had not apologized. Annie could feel it sitting between them like another unopened drawer. Lily spoke from beside her. Dad. Jonathan looked at his daughter. You should say something. The room tightened again. David muttered, Lily, stay out of this. Jonathan's eyes flashed toward him. Do not tell my daughter to ignore what she knows is right. David's mouth shut. Lily looked startled, then a little stronger. Jonathan turned back to Annie. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. His face had changed from suspicion to something more difficult. Shame. Maybe. Or grief, wearing shame's coat. He began. A sound came from the hall before he could finish. Footsteps, slow but firm. Marcus Hill appeared in the doorway, his driver's cap tucked beneath one arm. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Whitmore, he said. Mr. Reed is downstairs asking whether Miss Williams should still be removed from today's schedule. Annie felt her stomach turn. Removed. After everything they had read, after the serial number matched, after Eleanor's own handwriting had spoken from the page, someone downstairs was still trying to make her disappear. Jonathan's face hardened, but this time the anger did not point at Annie. Did he say removed? Marcus looked briefly at Annie before answering. Yes, sir. David rubbed his forehead. This is exactly why we should handle this privately. Annie stood, still holding the watch. No. Jonathan turned to her. Her voice was quiet, but there was nothing weak in it now. That word again, privately. Downstairs I was questioned in front of everyone who happened to be there. Your wife accused me. Your brother accused me. You let them. Now that there is proof, suddenly everyone wants privacy. Victoria looked down. David's jaw tightened. Annie fastened the watch back onto her wrist. Her fingers were still trembling, but she finished the clasp by herself. I'm not being removed from a job I didn't even get to start, she said. If Mr. Reed has questions, he can ask them where the accusation began. Jonathan looked at her for a long second. Then he nodded. You're right. Annie did not thank him. She should not have to thank a man for admitting what had become obvious. Jonathan handed the journal to Clara and folded the receipt carefully. Bring the journal. Bring the service record. Clara nodded. David said, Jonathan, think about the staff hearing this. Jonathan turned to him. They already heard enough to judge her. They can hear enough to correct themselves. Marcus stepped aside from the doorway. There was something in his eyes when he looked at Annie, not pity, not surprise. Recognition. As they left Eleanor's room, Annie glanced once more at the chair by the window, the folded blanket, the perfume bottle, the ordinary things a woman had left behind. She wondered what Eleanor would think of all this. Maybe she would be disappointed. Maybe she would be sad. Or maybe she would simply say that truth often arrives late because people make it walk uphill. At the top of the stairs, Lily moved closer to Annie. "I still want you to tutor me," she said. Annie looked at her. "Even after all this?" "Especially after all this." Annie did not know what to say to that, so she just gave a small nod. They descended the staircase together. Jonathan went first, carrying the receipt like a document that had become heavier than paper. Victoria followed with her hands folded tightly in front of her. David came behind, quiet and displeased. Clara carried the journal against her chest. Marcus walked at the back, making sure no one hurried Annie down those stairs like a problem. Below them, the living room waited, and this time, Annie was not walking back into it to explain herself. She was walking back with proof. Thomas Reed was standing near the living room entrance when they came down. He had a tablet tucked against his side, and the careful expression of a man who preferred problems to arrive already solved. Behind him, one of the security men waited by the hallway, not blocking the door, but close enough for Annie to notice. The sight of him made her stomach tighten again. Jonathan reached the bottom step and stopped. "Mr. Reed," Thomas straightened. "Sir, I thought it best to pause Miss Williams's employment until the matter is resolved." "It is being resolved," Jonathan said. Thomas glanced at Annie's wrist. "With respect, sir, there are liability concerns. She entered the property wearing a valuable item connected to the household. Until we understand how, we understand more than you do," Jonathan cut in. Thomas blinked. He was used to being interrupted by Jonathan, but not corrected in front of staff. David came down behind Victoria and said, "Thomas is only doing his job." Annie looked at David. "Funny how everyone's job today includes doubting me." David's mouth tightened. "You are making this personal." "It became personal when you looked at my shoes and decided they told you my character." No one answered quickly. Lily came down the last few steps and stood beside Annie, not touching her, not making a scene, just standing there. It was a small thing, but Annie felt it. Jonathan turned toward Thomas. "My mother's journal confirms she met a young woman named Annie 2 years ago outside Harris Pharmacy. My mother wrote that Annie helped her during a robbery attempt and that she gave Annie the watch freely." Thomas's face changed just enough to show calculation. "A journal?" Mrs. Clara stepped forward with the blue book held against her chest, in Mrs. Whitmore's own handwriting. "And the serial number matches the service record," Victoria added, quieter than before. Thomas looked from one face to another, sensing the ground had moved while he was downstairs. "I see." Annie almost laughed. 2 words, "I see," as if seeing were something he could choose once the powerful people gave him permission. Jonathan did not let him retreat that easily. "You were going to remove her from the schedule." "Temporarily," Thomas said, "only to avoid unnecessary discomfort." Annie took 1 step forward. "You keep using that word." Thomas looked at her, surprised she had spoken to him directly. "Miss Williams, I assure you." "No," Annie said. Her voice was not loud, but it made him stop. "You don't get to assure me after deciding I should disappear. You didn't ask if I was uncomfortable when I was being questioned. You didn't ask if Lily was uncomfortable watching it. You only became worried about discomfort when the truth started making this house look bad." The security man lowered his eyes. Thomas's face reddened. "That is not fair." Annie held his gaze. Neither was any of this. Jonathan watched her, and for the first time, there was no impatience in his expression. There was discomfort, yes, but he did not look away from it. Victoria set her phone on the side table as if she no longer wanted it in her hand. "Thomas, I think Miss Williams deserves an apology." Thomas looked at her, then Jonathan, as if waiting for instruction. Annie noticed and felt a fresh sting. Even his apology needed approval. Jonathan said, "Not because my wife said so. Because you were wrong." Thomas drew himself up. "Miss Williams, I apologize if you felt—" "No," Jonathan said. Thomas stopped. Jonathan's voice hardened. "Do not begin with if." A silence followed. David looked irritated. Clara looked almost relieved. Thomas swallowed. He faced Annie again, less polished this time. "Miss Williams, I apologize for assuming the worst, and for suggesting you be removed before hearing the full truth." Annie listened. It was not perfect, but at least it had a shape that resembled responsibility. "Thank you," she said. Thomas nodded, clearly eager to be done, but Annie was not. "And I want you to understand something," she said. I came here for work. Not charity, not trouble. Work. If I stay, I want to be treated like a tutor, not like someone being watched until she makes everyone comfortable. Lily glanced at her father. Jonathan nodded slowly. That is fair. David gave a short laugh. We are negotiating terms now? Jonathan turned to him. We are correcting a mistake. David's eyes narrowed. You're letting guilt steer the room. No, Jonathan said. For once, I am letting evidence do it. That quieted him. Clara placed the journal on the coffee table and opened it to the marked page. The room gathered around the truth without anyone announcing it. Annie stayed back at first, because she had no need to reread words she had lived. But Lily moved closer to the table, curious and careful. May I see? Lily asked. Jonathan hesitated. This is your grandmother's private writing. She wrote about Annie, Lily said. And everyone here talked about Annie. I think she should decide. That surprised Annie. So did the way everyone looked toward her. Annie thought of Eleanor in the pharmacy chair, tired but clear-eyed, giving away a watch that everyone in this house had treated like an object too important for a girl like Annie to touch. Maybe Eleanor had wanted the story told. Maybe that was why she wrote it down so plainly. She can read it, Annie said. Jonathan looked at her, a brief nod. All right. Lily bent over the journal. She read silently at first, her lips moving just a little. When she reached the line about the young black girl with a school backpack, she looked up at Annie. You were scared and still helped her, Lily said. Annie shifted the folder in her arms. Sometimes scared is all you get. You just decide what to do while it's there. Lily absorbed that. My grandma really gave it to you. Yes. Then it's yours. The words were simple. A child could say them in 3 seconds. The adults had needed accusations, journals, serial numbers, and shame to arrive at the same place. Victoria sat on the edge of the sofa. She looked tired now. Not in body, but in face. Annie, when I said you must have stolen it, I was wrong. I saw the watch and made the rest of the story myself. Annie did not rush to comfort her. Why? Victoria looked up. Why what? Why was that the story you made? The question was not angry, but it was direct enough to make Victoria go still. David muttered, Good Lord. Jonathan glanced at him. Let her answer. Victoria looked at Annie for a long moment. Because I thought it was impossible. For me to have it? For you to have it honestly, Victoria admitted. The room changed again. Not dramatically, just enough for the truth to show its teeth. Annie nodded once, though the answer hurt. Thank you for saying it plainly. Victoria's eyes shone, but she did not cry. I am sorry. I heard you, Annie said. I'm going to need time before I know what to do with it. That answer seemed to unsettle Victoria more than forgiveness would have. Annie was glad. Forgiveness should not be treated like a napkin handed across a table. Jonathan moved toward the coffee table and picked up the service record. There is another matter. Annie looked at him. This watch is yours, he said. David immediately shifted. Jonathan, it is hers, Jonathan repeated, without looking at him. My mother gave it to her. The journal says so. The serial number confirms it is the same watch. No one in this house will question that again. Annie felt her throat tighten. She had known it was hers for 2 years. Hearing him say it in front of everyone still mattered, and she hated that it mattered. But it did. Jonathan turned to Thomas. Miss Williams remains Lily's tutor if she chooses to continue. She will be paid for today in full, whether or not a lesson happens. Thomas nodded. Yes, sir, and no one here will treat her as a risk. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Understood. Annie looked at Jonathan. You keep saying if I choose. Yes. Do I really have a choice? Jonathan's answer did not come quickly. Yes. If I walk out right now, you won't call the agency and say I was difficult? No. You won't tell people I caused trouble? No. You won't make my mother hear some polite version of what happened that still makes me sound guilty? Jonathan's face tightened. No. Annie studied him. I want that in writing. David threw up one hand. This is absurd. Jonathan did not look at him. Thomas, prepare a written confirmation that Miss Williams was not at fault, that the watch was given to her by my mother, and that her employment record will reflect no misconduct. Thomas hesitated only half a second. I'll draft it. Now, Jonathan said. Thomas left the room with the security man following him. The living room grew quieter after they were gone. Not peaceful, but less crowded with suspicion. Lily moved back to the study table and touched the edge of the algebra workbook. We probably won't get much done today. Annie looked at the workbook, then at the watch on her wrist. Her first instinct was to leave. Her mother would understand. Anyone would. But Lily stood there with a pencil in her hand, trying to find something ordinary inside a day the adults had broken. "What are you working on?" Annie asked. Lily blinked. "Linear equations." Annie gave a small nod. "Those are not as scary as people make them sound." Lily's mouth almost smiled. "That's what the last tutor said. Then she gave me 30 problems," and checked her phone. "I only brought 12, Annie said. For the first time, the air loosened. Jonathan watched them from near the coffee table. Victoria sat very still. David looked as though he wanted to argue but had run out of places to stand. Clara went toward the kitchen. "I'll bring tea. And maybe something sweet. This house could use both." As she passed Annie, she paused. "Mrs. Whitmore would have liked seeing you here." Annie looked at her. "Even after all this?" "Especially after all this," Clara said. Annie turned back to Lily. She placed her folder on the table and opened it. The top page was bent from how tightly she had held it. But the questions were still there in blue ink. What subject feels hardest? What kind of books do you like? What helps you learn when you feel stuck? Lily read them upside down and pointed to the last one. "That one. What helps you learn when you feel stuck?" Annie asked. Lily nodded. Annie pulled out the chair across from her. "Usually someone patient." Lily sat down. Annie remained standing for a second longer. She looked at Jonathan. "This doesn't mean everything is fine." "I know," he said. "I'm staying for Lily right now. Not because you apologized. You haven't." The words landed cleanly. Jonathan lowered his eyes. "I know that too." Annie sat across from Lily and opened the workbook. For the first time since entering the Whitmore home, she was doing the job she had come to do. But the watch on her wrist kept ticking between the numbers and the silence, reminding every adult in the room that being proven innocent was not the same as never having been wounded. Clara returned with a tray of tea, 2 glasses of water, and a plate of shortbread cookies cut into neat squares. She set everything on the side table instead of the study table, as if she understood Annie did not want the lesson turned into a family gathering. Still, the smell of warm tea softened the room a little. Not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to let everyone breathe without sounding guilty. Lily sat across from Annie with her pencil ready, though her eyes kept drifting to the watch. Annie noticed and tapped the workbook gently. "The equation is over here." "I know," Lily said. "I'm not trying to stare." "It's okay." Lily looked embarrassed. "I just keep thinking Grandma gave it to you and nobody knew." Annie glanced toward Jonathan. He was standing near the fireplace with the service record in his hand, not reading it anymore, just holding it. Victoria sat on the sofa, quieter than before. David had moved to the window and looked out at the lawn as though the trees had personally offended him. "Sometimes people do good things without announcing them," Annie said. "My grandma did that," Lily said. "I think she did." Jonathan looked up then, but Annie kept her attention on the page. "All right," she said. "Linear equations. When you see something like this, don't panic because it has letters. The letter is just the part we don't know yet." Lily gave a small shrug. "That's the part I hate. Most people do. Unknown things make people nervous." The sentence landed in the room in a way Annie had not intended. Victoria looked down at her hands. Jonathan's grip tightened on the paper. Annie pretended not to notice. "So we don't fight the unknown. We isolate it." Lily frowned at the worksheet. "Like getting X alone?" "Exactly. You move everything else out of the way until the truth is standing by itself." For a few seconds, Lily only stared at the equation. Then she looked at Annie. "That sounds like today." Annie breathed out through her nose, almost a laugh. "A little. Except today everybody moved the wrong things first." Annie leaned back. "That's a good way to say it." David turned from the window. "Are we having a math lesson or a moral one?" Lily's pencil stopped. Jonathan looked at his brother. David spread his hands. "What?" "I'm only saying the child has schoolwork." Annie looked at David, then at Lily. "He's right about one thing. You do have schoolwork." Lily whispered. "I don't like when he talks like that." "Then don't learn it from him," Annie said, gently enough that it did not sound like an attack, but clearly enough that David heard. Victoria looked toward David. "Leave her alone." He stared at his sister-in-law. Now everyone's taking instructions from the tutor. No, Victoria said. I'm taking instruction from the last hour. That quieted him more than anger would have. Annie returned to the worksheet. Subtract 3 from both sides. Lily wrote carefully. Her handwriting was neat, but slow. Each number shaped like she did not trust it to stay put. Good, Annie said. Now divide by 2. Lily did it, then looked up. X equals 6. There you go. That was it. That was it. I thought it would be harder. A lot of things feel harder before someone explains them without making you feel stupid. Lily looked at her father. Jonathan heard it. Annie could tell by the way he lowered his eyes. Clara poured tea into cups and set one near Annie. Sugar? No, thank you. You sure? Annie almost said she was fine out of habit. Then she remembered she had not eaten since late morning. 1, please. Clara added a sugar cube and slid the cup within reach. The gesture was small, but after being treated like a problem, being served tea like a guest almost made Annie uncomfortable. Victoria noticed. Do you take milk? Annie looked at her. Sometimes. Victoria poured a little milk into the cup, then stopped. Tell me if that's too much. It's fine, Annie said. The politeness between them felt thin but real, like a bridge made of paper, not strong enough yet, but better than empty air. Jonathan finally moved from the fireplace. Miss Williams. Annie did not look away from Lily's worksheet right away. Yes? I need to make a call. David straightened. To the agency? Jonathan's eyes stayed on Annie. To Mr. Reed, and then to our family attorney. The written statement should be proper. Annie heard the word attorney and felt her shoulders tense. Jonathan noticed. Not against you. I've heard that kind of sentence before, Annie said. Victoria set the milk down. He means to protect you. Annie looked at her. People keep saying things are for my protection after they've already hurt me. Victoria accepted that without arguing. Jonathan's voice softened, not dramatically, but enough. Then let me say it clearly. I will put in writing that you did not steal the watch, that my mother gave it to you, and that what happened here today was the result of my error. David moved away from the window. Your error? Jonathan turned to him. Yes. You're going to put that in writing? Yes. For a tutor you met an hour ago? For a young woman I accused without listening. The room went quiet. Annie looked at him then. There it was. Almost an apology. Not full, not clean, but closer than before. David's face hardened. You're letting guilt make you careless. Jonathan folded the receipt once along its original crease. I was careless when I saw the watch and decided the person wearing it must be guilty. David looked stunned, as if Jonathan had slapped him without moving. Clara stood very still. Lily smiled a little, but quickly hid it behind her pencil. Jonathan took out his phone and stepped into the hallway. His voice carried just enough for them to hear pieces of it. Thomas, prepare a statement now. No. Not neutral language. Use her full name. Annie Williams. Yes. It should say no misconduct. No. She is not being released. Annie lowered her eyes to the workbook, but the numbers blurred. Lily leaned closer. That's good, right? It's a start. Why don't you sound happy? Annie thought about that, because sometimes when people finally stop pushing you underwater, they expect you to thank them for letting you breathe. Lily's face became serious. Annie softened her tone. I'm not saying your dad is doing nothing. He is doing something, but I'm still the one who had to go through it. Lily nodded slowly. I think I get it. I hope you do, Annie said. Not because you should feel bad, because someday you may be in a room where someone else is being treated unfairly, and I want you to know sooner than the adults did today. Victoria's eyes lifted to Annie. This time there was no defensiveness in them. David muttered, She's 12. Annie turned to him. Old enough to see, old enough to learn. Clara added, Children learn from silence too, Mr. David. That is why adults should be careful with it. David looked away again. Jonathan returned a few minutes later. Thomas is drafting the statement. The attorney will review it tonight. Annie nodded. Thank you. He seemed to know the thank you was for the action, not for the wound. There's something else. Annie waited. My mother's journal mentions a letter. Jonathan glanced toward Clara. Not in the entry we read, but on the next page. She wrote that if she ever found the girl again, she wanted to give her a note. Clara's brow tightened. A note? Jonathan opened the journal again and read silently for a moment. She wrote, I have put the letter in the rosewood box until I can find her. Victoria's eyes moved toward the stairs. The rosewood box from her writing desk? Clara nodded. I saw it upstairs. Lower shelf. Left side. David sighed. Now another search. Jonathan looked at Annie. You don't have to continue with this today. Annie touched the edge of the watch. If the letter was meant for me, I want to see it. Victoria stood. Then we should get it. David gave her a sharp look. You too? Victoria met his stare. Yes, me too. Lily pushed back her chair. Can I come? Jonathan hesitated. Annie spoke before he did. Only if your father says yes, and only if you understand this is not a game. I know, Lily said. Jonathan looked at his daughter for a long moment, then nodded. You may come. Annie closed the workbook. The lesson had barely begun, but it had done more than solve for X. It had shown Lily that truth was not always handed down by the loudest person in the room. They walked back toward the stairs, slower this time. Annie no longer felt dragged through the house by accusation. Still, every step reminded her that this place had questioned her before it welcomed her. At the foot of the staircase, Marcus appeared from the hallway. Everything all right? Jonathan answered. We're going back to Mother's room. Marcus looked at Annie. You okay to keep going? The question was simple, but it was the first one that placed her comfort at the center. Annie nodded. I want to know what she wrote. Marcus stepped aside. Then I'll wait here. David said, You don't need to stand guard. Marcus's expression did not change. I'm not standing guard for you. David's face tightened, but Jonathan was already moving. Upstairs, Eleanor's room waited with its quiet chair, its folded blanket, and its drawers full of things no one had asked enough questions about. Clara went directly to the writing desk, knelt carefully, and opened the lower cabinet. There, Victoria said, pointing. Clara lifted out a small rosewood box with brass corners. She placed it on the desk. The lid was smooth from years of use, and a faint scent of lavender rose when she opened it. Inside were old greeting cards, a rosary, a pressed white flower, and one cream envelope. The front read in Eleanor's handwriting, For Annie, the brave girl from Harris Pharmacy. Annie stopped breathing. Lily whispered, She really knew you. Annie reached for the envelope, then paused and looked at Jonathan, not for permission, to make sure he understood that this, at least, was not his first. Jonathan stepped back. It's yours, he said. Annie picked up the envelope with both hands. For the first time all day, nobody asked her to prove anything before she opened what had been meant for her. Annie held the envelope so carefully that the paper barely bent between her fingers. The room had gone quiet again, but this silence felt different from the one downstairs. It did not press on her, like accusation. It waited. Her name sat on the front in Eleanor Whitmore's handwriting. For Annie, the brave girl from Harris Pharmacy. Annie read it twice, then a third time, because part of her still could not believe a woman she had known for less than half an hour had remembered her long enough to write those words. Lily stood beside the desk, hands folded in front of her. Victoria had moved closer but kept a respectful distance. David lingered near the door, his face set in a way that made him look less certain than he wanted to appear. Jonathan stood a few feet away, still and quiet, his eyes not on the watch now but on the envelope. Mrs. Clara touched Annie's shoulder lightly. Take your time, sweetheart. Annie nodded, though her throat had tightened too much for speech. She slipped one finger beneath the flap and opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded once. It carried the faint scent of lavender, the same scent that lived in the room, in the blanket, in the drawers, in the pieces of a woman's life that had been kept after she was gone. Annie unfolded the letter. The first line made her stop. My dear Annie. She pressed her lips together. Lily whispered, Do you want someone else to read it? Annie shook her head. No. I can. Her voice came out thin, but it came out. She read silently at first. My dear Annie, if this letter ever finds you, then perhaps the watch did what I hoped it might do. I have thought of you often since that day outside Harris Pharmacy. I did not know your last name. I did not know where you lived. I only knew that when I was frightened and old and embarrassed to need help, you came toward me while others looked away. Annie blinked hard. The words blurred, then cleared. Jonathan looked down. Annie kept reading, but now aloud because the room needed to hear it too. I should have asked you to stay. I should have made sure you got home safely. But you were scared. And I recognized that fear. Not the fear of those boys, but the fear of being noticed by the wrong people for doing the right thing. Mrs. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Victoria's face changed. The words seemed to reach a place in her that earlier arguments had not. Annie's hand shook, but she continued. I gave you my watch because I wanted you to have proof that someone saw you clearly that day. Not as a problem. Not as a stranger from another side of town. Not as a child who should know her place. I saw a young woman with courage in her bones and kindness in her hands. Lily looked at Annie with wide eyes, not crying, not speaking, just taking the words in. David shifted near the door. Mother always did right dramatically. Jonathan turned toward him so quickly that David stopped. Don't, Jonathan said. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. David looked away. Annie did not stop reading. She could not. Eleanor's voice on the page had become stronger than the room. The watch is yours. I gave it freely. If anyone in my family questions that, tell them I was in full possession of my mind, my property, and my gratitude. Tell Jonathan, if he is there, that I hope he listens before he judges. He is a good son in many ways, but grief and success have made him impatient with ordinary people's truths. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He looked as though every word had found him unprepared. Victoria glanced at him, then back at Annie. Annie read the next line more slowly. If he has frightened you, I am sorry. If he has made you feel small, I am sorrier still. A house can be large and still fail to make room for mercy. The room stayed still. Annie had to lower the letter for a moment. The sentence landed too close to what had happened. Eleanor had written it before knowing the day would come true almost exactly. Jonathan took one step forward, then stopped himself. Annie, she shook her head once. Not harshly, but enough. Let me finish. He stepped back. Annie lifted the letter again. I once told you the watch might take you where you needed to be. I did not mean wealth. I did not mean favor. I meant that one day you may enter a room where your truth is doubted, and I wanted you to carry something that could speak when people refused to hear you. I wish that were not necessary. But I have lived long enough to know that good people are not always believed quickly, especially when they are young, poor, or black. No one moved. David's face hardened at the word, then softened into discomfort. Victoria's eyes lowered. Jonathan looked at Annie as if seeing, for the first time, not only what he had done but the pattern his actions belonged to. Annie's voice trembled on the last paragraph. Keep the watch, Annie. Not for its gold. Not for the name on its rim. Keep it because courage should be remembered in families that are not your own. And if my son ever stands before you with suspicion in his eyes, I pray he becomes man enough to ask forgiveness before it is too late. Annie stopped. There was one final line. She read it quietly. With gratitude, Eleanor Whitmore. For a while no one spoke. The house itself seemed to settle around them, floorboards and old wood and the quiet breath of people who had no place to hide from what had just been read. Annie folded the letter carefully, but she did not put it back in the envelope yet. She held it against the watch on her wrist, paper against gold, proof against proof. Jonathan's face had gone pale. Victoria whispered, she knew. Jonathan did not answer. She knew you might react this way, Victoria said. That made him look at his wife. Victoria's voice was not accusing, but it was not gentle either. She knew this family might question the girl before thanking her. David took a breath. This is becoming unfair. Annie turned toward him. Unfair to who? He opened his mouth, then stopped. Annie's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady now. Because I would like to know. Was it unfair when you said I couldn't afford the watch? Was it unfair when I had to explain why I needed a job? Was it unfair when everyone looked at me like the only possible answer was theft? David looked at Jonathan, but Jonathan did not rescue him. Annie stepped closer to the desk and set the letter down, smoothing it once with her palm. I didn't ask Mrs. Whitmore to write this. I didn't ask her to give me the watch. I didn't even know who she was. I helped an old woman because she needed help. Her voice cracked, but she kept it, and somehow that still wasn't enough until a dead woman wrote it down. Lily looked at her father. Dad. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were red. You're right, he said to Annie. The words were quiet. Annie waited, because after everything, she was done filling in meaning for people who should know how to say what they meant. Jonathan looked at the letter, then at the watch, then finally at her. "You were right from the beginning," he said. "And I was wrong from the beginning." David stared at him. Victoria's shoulders lowered as if she had been holding a breath for an hour. Annie did not say thank you. Truth was not a gift he was giving her. Jonathan took another breath. "I accused you in my home. My brother insulted you. My wife doubted you. My staff prepared to remove you. And I allowed all of it to happen because the story in my head was more convenient than the truth standing in front of me." His voice roughened on the last few words. Annie could see him fighting for control, but the control no longer looked noble. It looked like another kind of hiding. Mrs. Clara said softly, "Mr. Whitmore." He nodded, but did not look away from Annie. "I owe you an apology," he said. Annie's answer came before she had time to soften it. "Not up here." Jonathan stilled. She pointed toward the hall, toward the stairs, toward the living room where the first accusation had been made. "You didn't question me privately. You didn't let me be embarrassed privately. So please don't apologize privately, just because now everyone knows I told the truth." The room absorbed that. Victoria looked at Jonathan. David looked away. Clara's expression held quiet approval. Lily stood very still, learning more than any adult had planned to teach. Jonathan nodded once. "You're right," he said again, and this time the words seemed to cost him more. Annie picked up the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. "I want to keep this." "It was written for you," Jonathan said. "Of course," David muttered. "We should make a copy for family records." Jonathan turned to him. "Later." Annie looked at David. "You can have a copy, but not before I do." David did not answer. Jonathan stepped toward the door, then paused. Everyone who heard the accusation should hear the apology. Victoria nodded. "Yes." David looked as if he wanted to object, but Clara spoke before he could. Mrs. Whitmore would expect no less. That ended it. They left Eleanor's room together. Annie walked with the envelope in one hand and the watch on her wrist. This time, she did not trail behind. Lily walked beside her. Clara followed close, carrying the journal. Jonathan walked ahead, but not as if leading a suspect. He walked like a man going toward a debt he could no longer postpone. At the top of the stairs, Annie glanced once back at Eleanor's room. The door remained open. The rosewood box sat on the desk, its lid lifted, no longer hiding what had been saved for her. Downstairs, voices quieted as they approached. Thomas Reed stood near the coffee table with a printed page in his hand. Marcus waited by the hallway. The security man was gone. Thomas looked relieved to see Jonathan. "Sir, I have the statement." Jonathan did not take it yet. "Good," he said. "But before paper, there will be words." Thomas blinked. "Sir?" Jonathan turned toward Annie in the same living room where he had first asked about the watch. His face broke a little then, not fully, but enough for everyone to see the grief beneath the pride. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice low, "I am going to say this where I should have listened." Annie stood still. The watch ticked once against her wrist, and this time, no one interrupted her silence. Jonathan stood in front of Annie, and for the first time that afternoon, the room did not belong to him. It should have. His name was on the gate, the deed, the paychecks, the charitable plaques in the hallway, the framed newspaper articles near the study. Every person in that living room had learned to move around his moods, his schedule, his rules. But now his mother's letter sat in Annie's hand. The watch ticked on Annie's wrist, and the truth had chosen a side. Thomas Reed held the printed statement but did not offer it again. Victoria stood near the sofa with both hands clasped in front of her. David remained by the fireplace, stiff and silent. Clara stood a few steps behind Annie with Eleanor's journal pressed to her chest. Marcus waited near the hall, his face calm, his eyes watchful. Lily stood beside the study table, not speaking, but not looking away either. Jonathan looked at each of them before returning his eyes to Annie. "I accused you," he said, "not with enough proof, not with enough patience, not with enough decency." Annie held still. The words were a beginning, but she had learned in the last 2 hours that beginnings could still turn away from the truth if no one held them there. Jonathan swallowed. "When I saw that watch, I did not ask who you were. I did not ask what my mother might have done, or why she might have done it. I saw you wearing something expensive, something connected to this family, and I let suspicion answer before you could." David shifted at the word suspicion. Jonathan noticed but kept going. "My brother insulted you. My wife doubted you. My staff prepared to remove you from a job you had not even started. I did not stop them soon enough. Victoria lowered her eyes. Thomas looked at the paper in his hand. Jonathan's voice dropped. And I am sorry. The room waited for Annie to soften, but she did not. Not because she wanted him to suffer. Because she was trying to understand whether the apology was for what he had done or for being caught by the truth. She looked at him and said, "For what?" Jonathan blinked. Annie's voice stayed quiet. "People say they're sorry all the time, Mr. Whitmore. Sometimes they mean they're sorry it got uncomfortable. Sometimes they mean they're sorry the proof showed up. So I'm asking, what are you sorry for?" David muttered, "This is unnecessary." Jonathan turned to him. "No, it is necessary." David's jaw tightened, but he said no more. Jonathan faced Annie again. His face had lost the polished hardness it carried downstairs. He looked older now. Not weak, but stripped of the certainty that had made him dangerous. "I am sorry," he said, "for treating you like a thief." Annie's throat tightened, but she did not speak. "I am sorry for letting your clothes, your job, your age, and the color of your skin become evidence in my mind before I had any facts." Victoria looked up sharply at that, as if hearing it said so plainly made the room smaller. Jonathan continued, "I am sorry for making you defend your name in front of my daughter, my family, and my staff. I am sorry that my mother trusted you better than I did, and she had only known you for minutes." The last sentence caught in his throat. Annie saw it then, not the billionaire, not the man who owned the house. A son standing in the wreckage of something his mother had tried to prevent. He looked toward the envelope in Annie's hand. "She wrote that if I ever stood before you with suspicion in my eyes, she hoped I would become man enough to ask forgiveness before it was too late." His eyes reddened. "I don't know if I am too late," he said, "but I am asking." No one moved. Annie looked down at the watch. The gold rim with Eleanor's name had felt like a burden when Jonathan first pointed at it. Now it felt like Eleanor was still in the room, not as a ghost, not as a memory trapped in expensive furniture, but as a woman who had written the truth before anyone knew it would be needed. Annie's voice came slowly. "I hear your apology." Jonathan nodded once, as though even that was more than he deserved. "I'm not ready to make you feel better about it," she added. His face tightened, but he accepted it. "I understand. I don't think you do," Annie said, not unkindly. "But maybe you can start." Lily looked at her father, waiting to see what he would do with that. Jonathan turned to Thomas. "Read the statement." Thomas hesitated. "Now?" "Yes, out loud." Thomas looked uncomfortable, but he lifted the paper. "This statement confirms that Miss Annie Williams has committed no misconduct in the Whitmore residence. The gold watch in her possession was given to her freely by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore following an incident at Harris Pharmacy 2 years ago, during which Miss Williams assisted Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Williams remains eligible to serve as tutor to Lily Whitmore, and no negative report will be made to the tutoring agency or any third party." Annie listened carefully. "Add something," Jonathan said. Thomas looked up. "Sir?" "Add that the accusation made against her was unfounded." Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir." "And add that I made it." The room became very still. David stepped forward. "Jonathan." Jonathan did not look at him. "Add it." Thomas swallowed. "Yes, sir." Annie watched Jonathan then. That mattered. Not because it erased what happened, but because it put the weight where it belonged. Not on vague misunderstanding. Not on confusion. On him. Victoria took a breath. Annie turned. Victoria looked as though she had been arranging words in her mind and finding each version too clean. "I owe you more than what I said upstairs. I looked at you and decided what kind of story you fit into. I did not ask myself why that story came so easily." Annie waited. Victoria continued, "That was ugly, and it was mine. I am sorry." There was no if, no discomfort, no softened edge. Annie nodded. "Thank you." David gave a sharp sigh, but Clara looked at him before he could speak. The old housekeeper did not say a word. She did not have to. Jonathan turned toward his brother. "David." David's face hardened. "What?" "You have something to say." I raised a concern. "You insulted her." I described reality. Annie looked at him. "No. You described what you thought reality should be for someone like me." David's eyes flicked toward her, and for once, he did not have a quick answer. Marcus spoke from near the hall. "A man can be wrong without losing his whole life, Mr. David, but he has to stop defending the wrong long enough to step out of it. David looked at Marcus as though he had forgotten the driver was there. Jonathan said, "Apologize." David's face flushed. "You're ordering me to apologize to the tutor?" Lily's voice cut in, small but clear. "Her name is Annie." Everyone looked at her. Lily did not cry. She did not shrink. Her hands gripped the back of the chair, but her eyes stayed on her uncle. "You keep saying the tutor like she isn't standing here." Annie felt something loosen in her chest. David looked from Lily to Annie. The silence stretched until it became clear even he could not push past it without looking smaller than he wanted to be. He cleared his throat. "Miss Williams, I should not have assumed you stole the watch." Annie waited. David added, stiffly, "And I should not have said you could not afford it." "Why?" Annie asked. David stared at her. Annie held his gaze. "Why shouldn't you have said it?" His mouth tightened. "Because it was insulting." "And?" David looked toward Jonathan, but Jonathan did not help him. Finally, he said, "Because your need to work does not prove dishonesty." Annie nodded once. "Thank you." She did not smile. He did not deserve one. Clara moved to the table and placed Eleanor's journal beside Thomas's statement. "Mrs. Whitmore used to say manners are what people use when character is still catching up." Victoria gave a faint, sad laugh. "She said that to me once." "She said it to all of you," Clara replied. Jonathan lowered himself into the armchair near the fireplace. It was the first time he had sat since the whole thing began. He looked suddenly tired, as if the house had been running on his certainty and now there was none left to hold him upright. Lily picked up her pencil again. "Can Annie still teach me?" The question was so ordinary that it almost startled everyone. Annie looked at the workbook still open on the study table. Equations waited there, calm and solvable. Numbers did not care about family pride. They did not accuse. They did not look at shoes or skin or old backpacks. Jonathan looked at Annie. "That is entirely her choice." Annie appreciated the answer, though part of her wished it had come earlier, before proof, before tears, before Eleanor had to speak from a letter. Lily turned to her. "I'd understand if you wanted to leave." Annie looked at the girl and saw no demand there, only honesty. "I should probably go home," Annie said. Lily nodded, but disappointment passed over her face. Annie added, "But I can stay for 20 minutes. Enough to finish the first page." Lily's face brightened just a little. Jonathan stood. "You do not have to work today." "I know," Annie said. "I'm not doing it for you." He accepted that too. Clara quietly brought Annie's tea closer to the study table. It had cooled, but Annie took a sip anyway. The sugar sat at the bottom, sweet and grainy. Thomas folded the statement. "I'll revise this immediately. Bring it to Miss Williams when it is done," Jonathan said. "She reads it before anyone signs it." Thomas nodded and left. David stayed by the fireplace, silent now. Victoria sat with her hands in her lap, watching Lily open her workbook. Marcus stepped back into the hall, but not far. Annie sat across from Lily and set Eleanor's envelope carefully beside her folder. "All right," she said, pointing to the next problem. "What do we do first when something looks complicated?" Lily looked at the equation, then at the adults around the room. "We move everything that doesn't belong until the truth is alone." Annie nodded. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. "That's right," Annie said. "Now show me." Lily bent over the page and began to write. The watch ticked beside the lesson, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. This time, no one questioned why it was there. The first page took 23 minutes. Annie knew because she watched the clock on the mantel more than once, not because Lily was slow, but because every minute in that room carried two lessons at the same time. One was algebra. The other was how adults behaved after they had been wrong. Lily worked carefully, erasing only when she had to. She did not ask for answers. She asked why a step mattered, why a number moved, why the same thing had to be done to both sides. Annie liked that. It meant Lily was not just trying to finish the page. She wanted the page to make sense. "That's better," Annie said, looking over the last equation. "You stopped guessing." Lily tapped the pencil against the paper. "I was guessing because I thought math was trying to trick me." "Math doesn't trick you. People do that." The words slipped out before Annie could soften them. Lily looked up. Across the room, Jonathan heard it too. He was standing near the fireplace again, but differently now, not guarding the room, not controlling it. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes stayed mostly on the floor. Annie looked back at the worksheet. "Sorry." That was not about the problem. It can be, Lily said. Annie gave her a small smile. Maybe. Thomas Reed returned with the revised statement printed on thick white paper, the kind used for contracts and invitations. He did not approach Annie the way he had earlier. This time he came to the edge of the study table and held the page out with both hands. Miss Williams, he said, Mr. Whitmore asked that you read it before anyone signs. Annie took it. She read slowly, line by line. It confirmed that Annie Williams had committed no misconduct, that the gold watch had been given to her freely by Eleanor Whitmore, that Jonathan Whitmore had made an unfounded accusation, and that no negative report would be made to the tutoring agency, Annie's mother, future employers, or any third party. That last part made her pause. She had not asked for future employers. Jonathan must have thought of that himself. Or maybe Clara had. Either way, it mattered. False stories had legs. They walked into places long after the truth got tired. Annie looked up. Add one more thing. Thomas held his pen ready. Yes, that I was hired based on my qualifications, and my position remains available if I choose to continue. Thomas nodded and wrote it down. David, still near the window, muttered, At this rate, she should send us an invoice. Jonathan looked at him. David, leave. The room froze. David straightened. What? You've said enough today. You're throwing me out of my brother's house over this? Jonathan's voice stayed level. I'm asking you to leave my living room because you still think being embarrassed is worse than what you helped do to her. David looked at Victoria, perhaps expecting support. She did not give it. He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. Fine. Enjoy the performance. He walked toward the hall. Annie did not watch him go at first, but then she turned. Mr. Whitmore. David stopped, irritated. What now? You forgot the last part. His face tightened. What last part? You apologized for saying I couldn't afford the watch, but you never apologized for enjoying the moment when you thought I had stolen it. David's mouth opened, then shut. The room went so quiet Annie could hear the paper in Thomas's hand shift. David's eyes moved away from hers. For the first time all afternoon, he looked not angry, not clever, but exposed. You don't know what I enjoyed, he said. No, Annie said. But I know what it feels like when someone finds comfort in having a reason to look down on you. David swallowed. He did not apologize. He did not defend himself either. He left without another word. The front door closed a minute later. Lily stared at the hallway. He's always like that when he's wrong. Jonathan looked at his daughter. So was I. That surprised her. Annie looked down at the statement again, pretending not to feel the weight of that sentence. Thomas cleared his throat. I'll revise and reprint. Use plain language, Annie said. Thomas blinked. Plain? Yes, not legal fog. If someone reads it later, I want them to know exactly what happened. Jonathan nodded. Plain language. Thomas left again. Victoria rose from the sofa and walked toward the study table. Annie stiffened before she could stop herself. Victoria noticed and stopped a few feet away. I won't crowd you, she said. Annie nodded. Victoria looked at Lily's worksheet. You did all of these? With Annie, Lily said. Victoria's mouth softened. Good. Lily tilted her head. Mom, why did you think Annie stole it? Victoria looked at Annie, then at her daughter. It would have been easy to say she was confused, that the watch startled her, that she was protecting the family. Annie could almost see those answers forming and being rejected. Because I judged too quickly, Victoria said. Because I saw what she was wearing and where she worked, and I let that matter more than what she was saying. Lily frowned. But you tell me not to judge people like that. I know. Then why did you? Victoria sat down slowly on the arm of the sofa. Because adults sometimes believe rules more easily when we are teaching them than when we have to live by them. Lily looked at Annie. Is that true? Annie thought about her answer. Sometimes, but a good adult admits it when a child catches them failing. Victoria looked at Annie with a tired gratitude that Annie was not ready to accept fully, but she did not reject it either. Jonathan moved toward the mantel and picked up a framed photograph. Eleanor stood beside him in the picture, one hand tucked under his arm. He stared at it for a long moment. She wanted to tell me, he said. No one asked what he meant. The answer was in the journal, in the letter, in the years he had been busy. Jonathan continued, not looking away from the photo. She tried to tell me about you. I remember now. She said there was a girl from the pharmacy. I told her I had a call in 10 minutes. Annie stayed silent. She said, "Jonathan, one day you may need to know this." I kissed her forehead and told her we would talk later. He swallowed. Later became her funeral. Victoria closed her eyes. Lily's pencil stopped moving. Jonathan set the photograph down carefully. When I saw the watch today, I thought I was defending her. But all I did was prove I still wasn't listening. The words should have made Annie feel something like satisfaction. Instead, they made her sad. Not for herself only, but for Eleanor, who had written letters to the future because the present had no time for her. Clara spoke from the side table. "Your mother did not like to force people to listen. She believed they should choose it." Jonathan gave a small, broken breath. "I chose late." "Late is not nothing," Clara said, "but it is still late." Annie looked at Clara. The older woman did not soften the truth to make the rich man more comfortable. Annie respected her for that. Thomas returned with the revised statement. This time, the language was clear. Annie read it twice. It said exactly what needed to be said. Jonathan signed first. Victoria signed as a witness. Clara signed as witness to Eleanor's journal and letter. Thomas signed as household manager. Then he offered the pen to Annie. She looked at it. "Why do I sign?" "To acknowledge receipt," Thomas said quickly, "not agreement with what happened." Annie read the line. It said she had received the statement and a copy would be provided to her before she left. She signed, Annie Williams. Her name looked small beneath theirs, but it was there in ink. Not whispered, not doubted, not spoken through someone else. Jonathan watched her sign. "Would you like me to call your mother and explain?" "No," Annie said at once. He nodded. "Of course." Annie softened the answer slightly. "I'll tell her. She should hear it from me first. May I write her a letter?" Annie studied him. "Why?" "Because if my daughter came home from a job and told me this had happened, I would want to know the person responsible did not hide from it." That answer felt honest enough to consider. "Write it," Annie said. "I'll decide whether she sees it." Jonathan nodded. "Fair." Lily looked at the clock. "Are you really leaving after 20 minutes? Annie glanced at the page. "We finished the first sheet. There are 11 more. That sounds like a next lesson problem." Lily's face fell a little, but she nodded. "Will there be a next lesson?" Annie did not answer right away. The room waited, but not like before. This time no one demanded. "I don't know yet," Annie said. "I need to go home and think." Jonathan accepted it. Victoria did too. Lily tried to. Clara went to fetch Annie's coat from the chair near the door. When she returned, she helped Annie into it with the care of someone sending a granddaughter into cold weather. Marcus appeared near the hall. "I can drive you home, Miss Williams." Annie almost refused. Pride rose first, quick and familiar. Then she thought of the bus stop beyond the long gate, the fading light, her mother waiting for a text. "Thank you," she said. "I'd appreciate that." Jonathan looked at Marcus. "Take the town car." Marcus nodded. Annie picked up her folder, Eleanor's letter, and the signed statement. Lily walked with her to the entryway. At the door, Lily said, "I'm sorry my family made your first day awful." Annie looked down at her. "Your family made it hard. You made it worth staying 20 minutes. Lily held that like a gift. Jonathan stood a few steps behind them. "Miss Williams." Annie turned. He looked like he had more to say, but not the right to ask her to stay and hear it. So he only said, "Thank you for helping my mother." Annie's hand went to the watch. "I wish someone had thanked me before accusing me," she said. Jonathan lowered his eyes. "So do I." Marcus opened the door. Cool air entered the house. Annie stepped outside, and this time, no one stopped her. Marcus did not speak until they reached the town car. He opened the back door for Annie, then paused before closing it. "You want the back seat, or would you rather sit up front?" The question surprised her. Most people in houses like the Whitmore mansion did not ask where she wanted to sit. They told her where to stand, where to enter, where to wait. "Front, please," she said. Marcus gave a small nod, opened the passenger door instead, and waited while she settled in with her folder on her lap, Eleanor's letter tucked inside it, and the signed statement folded carefully beneath the elastic band. The watch rested against her wrist, visible below her sleeve. The late afternoon light made the gold look warmer than it had inside the house. As the car rolled down the long driveway, Annie looked back once. The Whitmore mansion stood behind them with its tall windows and stone steps, unchanged from the outside. That bothered her. Something ugly had happened inside, something painful and true, yet the house still looked calm enough to be on a magazine cover. Marcus stopped at the gate while it opened. "You held yourself well in there," he said. Annie looked at him. "I didn't feel like I did. That's usually how it works." She watched the gate slide open. "I almost ran. But you didn't." "I wanted to." "That counts too," Marcus said. "Courage doesn't always feel like courage while you're doing it. Sometimes it just feels like not letting them have the last word." Annie turned that over in her mind as the car moved onto the road. The neighborhood outside the Whitmore property was quiet, with trimmed lawns, wide sidewalks, and houses set far back from the street. There were no corner stores, no bus stops with cracked benches, no kids cutting across vacant lots, no old men sitting outside a barber shop arguing about baseball. It felt less like a neighborhood than a place built to keep life at a distance. "My mother is going to ask how it went," Annie said. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "What are you going to tell her?" "I don't know. If I tell her everything, she'll want to quit her job and drive over there. She loves you." "I know. That's why I'm scared to tell her." Marcus nodded as if he understood more than he said. "You don't have to protect adults from the truth, Miss Williams. Especially not the ones who love you." Annie looked down at the folder. "People keep saying truth like it fixes things." "It doesn't fix everything," Marcus said, "but lies keep the wound dirty." She looked at him then. His profile was calm, but his eyes held the weight of years. "Did you know Mrs. Whitmore well? Well enough to miss her," he said. "Did she ever tell you about me?" "No, not directly. But after that day, she changed." "How?" "She started asking me to stop at places she used to avoid. Local pharmacies, small bakeries, a church clothing drive on the south side. Said she had spent too much of her life looking through windows instead of walking through doors." Annie sat with that. Marcus continued. "One time she asked me if I thought good people got noticed enough. I told her good people usually get noticed when somebody needs them and forgotten when things are fine." "What did she say?" "She said, then we should write things down." Annie touched the folder. The car slowed at a red light. A school bus crossed ahead of them, and for a moment Annie watched children through the windows, some laughing, some staring at phones, one boy pressing his forehead against the glass. Ordinary life moved on whether someone had been humiliated or not. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. "Mom, you okay? Did you get there? How's the house?" Annie stared at the message. Marcus glanced over. "You don't have to answer while I'm watching the road." That almost made her smile. She typed slowly. "I'm okay. Coming home earlier than expected. I'll explain when I get there." The reply came fast. "Earlier? What happened?" Annie's thumb hovered over the screen. She typed, "Nothing dangerous. I'm safe. A lot happened. Please don't worry until I'm home." Her mother sent back 3 dots. Then, "I'm already worried, but I'll wait." Annie breathed out. "She waiting?" Marcus asked. "Yes." "Good." The town car passed from wide streets into busier ones. The houses grew closer together. The lawns got smaller. Traffic thickened. Annie felt her body loosen with each familiar block, though the heaviness inside her stayed. She had wanted the Whitmore job because the pay was better than anything else she had found. 1 afternoon a week could help with groceries. 2 could help with rent. More than that, it had felt like a door opening. Now she did not know if walking through that door again would make her brave or foolish. "Would you go back?" she asked. Marcus considered before answering. "Depends what going back costs." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one." He turned onto a busier road. "Some rooms need people like you in them. But that doesn't mean you owe every room your pain." Annie looked at him. "Lily isn't like them." "No," Marcus said. "She's still becoming. That's why what happened today matters." She asked good questions. Children do that before adults teach them not to. Annie looked out the window. Mr. Whitmore apologized. "He started to." She turned back. "You don't think he meant it?" "I think he meant what he understood. I also think he has more to understand." That was exactly how Annie felt. But hearing Marcus say it helped. They reached Annie's apartment building just as the sky began to turn gray-blue. It was a brick building with old fire escapes, a small grocery on the corner, and a front step where someone had left a folded stroller. The sight of it steadied her more than she expected. Marcus parked by the curb but did not unlock the doors right away. "Can I say one more thing?" he asked. Annie nodded. "Don't let them turn you into the lesson and forget you're a person." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Rich people love a story after it stops accusing them. They'll say you taught them something. They'll say today changed them. Maybe it will. But you are not just the hard moment that made them better. You're a young woman who was hurt. Annie looked down at her hands. The watch sat there, bright against her skin. What am I supposed to do with that? Tell the truth when you're ready. Rest before you decide. And don't give away forgiveness just because somebody finally found manners. Annie gave a small, tired laugh. Mrs. Clara said something like that. Clara and I agree when it matters. He unlocked the doors and got out, then came around to open hers. Annie stepped onto the sidewalk. The air smelled like exhaust, fried food from the corner place, and rain that had not fallen yet. Marcus handed her the folder from the seat after she nearly forgot it. "Thank you," she said. "For the ride? For asking if I was okay before asking what happened?" He nodded once. "You have my number now. Mr. Whitmore asked me to give it to you in case you need a ride for another lesson. But you can use it if you need to reach someone who was there today." Annie took the card. "Does he know you said that last part?" "No." This time she did smile. Marcus returned to the car and waited until she got inside the building. Annie knew he was waiting because he had probably driven Eleanor Whitmore the same way, not leaving until the person reached the door. Her mother opened the apartment door before Annie could knock. Denise Williams stood there in hospital scrubs, hair wrapped in a scarf, face lined with fatigue and worry. She looked at Annie's face and did not ask if the house was nice, or if Lily was polite, or if the pay was still what they promised. She asked, "Who hurt you?" Annie's face crumpled. She stepped into her mother's arms, folder pressed between them, watch caught against her sleeve. For the first time all day, she did not have to stand straight. Denise held her tightly. "Baby, talk to me." Annie tried to answer, but the words would not come in order. They came as breath, then tears, then one broken sentence. "They thought I stole it." Denise's arms tightened. "The watch?" she asked. Annie nodded against her shoulder. For a moment, Denise said nothing. Then her voice changed, low and steady in the way Annie knew meant she was holding back anger. "Sit down. Mom, sit down first, then tell me everything." Annie sat at the small kitchen table where bills were stacked beside a bowl of apples. The apartment was warm, cluttered, and real. A half-full coffee mug sat near her mother's work badge. A pan from breakfast still waited in the sink. The radiator clicked near the window. Denise put water on the stove for tea, then came back and sat across from her. Annie unfolded the statement and placed it on the table. Then she placed Eleanor's letter beside it. Last, she took off the watch and laid it between them. Denise looked at the papers, then at the watch, then at Annie. "Start at the beginning," she said. So Annie did. She told her mother about Jonathan's question, David's insult, Victoria's accusation, Lily standing beside her, Clara's journal, the letter, the apology, the statement, Marcus's drive home. She did not make herself sound braver than she felt. She did not soften the parts that hurt. By the time she finished, the kettle had gone cold on the stove. Denise read the statement without speaking. Then she read Eleanor's letter. When she reached the line about a house being large and still failing to make room for mercy, her mouth tightened. She knew exactly what kind of family she had, Denise said. Annie nodded. Denise folded the letter carefully. "Are you going back?" "I don't know." "What do you want?" Annie stared at the watch. "I want today not to have happened." Denise reached across the table and covered her hand. "That choice is gone." "I know. So now choose what protects you. Not what teaches them. Not what helps Lily. Not what makes Mr. Whitmore feel redeemed. You." Annie looked at her mother. "What if protecting me means going back on my terms?" Denise studied her daughter for a long moment. She looked tired, angry, proud, and afraid all at once. "Then we write the terms down," she said. Annie laughed softly through the last of her tears. "You sound like a lawyer." "No," Denise said. "I sound like a mother whose child came home with paperwork proving she didn't steal what was already hers." The words settled between them. Annie picked up the watch and fastened it back onto her wrist. For 2 years, it had reminded her of the day she helped a stranger. Now it carried something else too, the sound of being doubted, the weight of being proven, and the beginning of a choice she would make for herself. By the next morning, Annie had slept less than 3 hours. She woke before her alarm, still wearing yesterday's exhaustion in her shoulders. The watch sat on the small table beside her bed, folded over Eleanor's letter and the statement from Jonathan Whitmore. For a few seconds, she only looked at it. The gold face caught the gray light slipping through the blinds, ordinary and impossible at the same time. From the kitchen, she heard her mother moving around. A cabinet opened, a spoon tapped against a mug. The kettle began its low rush toward boiling. Annie got dressed slowly. Jeans, a clean sweater, the same black flats. She brushed her hair, then stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Her face looked the same, but she did not feel the same. Yesterday, she had walked into a house hoping to be seen as qualified. She had walked out with proof that she was innocent. Those were not the same thing. When she entered the kitchen, Denise was at the table with a notebook open. Annie stopped. "Mum," Denise looked up over her glasses. "You said if you go back, we write the terms down." I said, "What if?" And I heard my daughter trying to talk herself into something before she protected herself. Annie sat across from her. On the page, Denise had written in careful block letters: transportation, payment, communication, respect, no private meetings. Annie looked at the last line. No private meetings? If Mr. Whitmore needs to discuss what happened, somebody else is in the room. Mrs. Bennett, the driver, me, a lawyer, the mailman, I don't care. Annie almost smiled. The mailman? I trust our mailman more than I trust that brother. That brother probably won't be there. Probably is not a policy. Annie reached for the tea her mother had made. It had too much honey, the way Denise always made it when she was worried. "I don't know if I'm going back," Annie said. "I know, but Lily needs help." Denise leaned back. "Lots of children need help. You are not required to walk back into pain just because a child is standing near it." She stood up for me. She did, and I'm proud of her for that. "But you are still my child." Annie looked down at the watch. "I don't feel like a child. That's because the world keeps asking you to be older than you are." The words made Annie quiet. Her phone buzzed on the table. Both women looked at it. Unknown number. Annie hesitated. Denise picked up her coffee. Speaker. Annie answered and put the phone between them. "Hello? Miss Williams. This is Jonathan Whitmore." Denise's eyes sharpened. Annie sat straighter. "Good morning. I hope I'm not calling too early." "You are," Denise said. There was a brief silence. Annie closed her eyes for half a second. "This is my mother, Denise Williams." Jonathan's voice changed. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry. I can call back at a better time." "No," Denise said. "You can speak now. I've been awake since my daughter came home shaking." Annie stared at the table. Jonathan did not defend himself. "Then I owe you an apology as well. You owe her more than one." "Yes, ma'am." That ma'am did not impress Denise, but it kept her quiet. Jonathan continued. "I wanted to confirm that the written statement was emailed to Annie last night, and a hard copy will be mailed today. I also wrote a letter to you, Mrs. Williams. Annie said she would decide whether you saw it." "I saw everything she brought home," Denise said, "including your mother's letter." Another pause. This one felt heavier. "My mother was a better listener than I was," Jonathan said. Denise replied, "That is a low bar based on yesterday." Annie covered her mouth, not sure whether to laugh or disappear. Jonathan took it without protest. "You're right. Why are you calling?" "To ask what Annie needs before she decides whether to continue tutoring Lily." Denise looked at Annie and lifted her eyebrows as if to say, "There, speak." Annie took a breath. "I haven't decided. I understand. If I come back, I don't enter through the staff door." "Agreed. I'm there as Lily's tutor, not as a guest you pity, not as a problem you're trying to repair." "Agreed. No one speaks to me about the watch unless I bring it up." A small silence. "Agreed. If your brother is there, I leave. David will not be present during your tutoring sessions." "That's not what I said," Jonathan corrected himself. "If David is present, you may leave, and you will still be paid for the scheduled session." Denise nodded once. Annie continued, her voice steadier now. "If your wife has a concern, she speaks to me with respect or through you later. Not in front of Lily." "Yes, and Lily should not be made to feel responsible for what happened." Jonathan's voice softened. "I agree completely." Denise tapped the notebook and whispered, "Transportation." Annie said, "Marcus drives me home if the session ends after dark, or I don't take evening sessions." "Done. And my mother gets the agency contact, the schedule, and the payment agreement in writing." "Yes." Denise leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Whitmore." "Yes, ma'am? My daughter is not a lesson plan for your family's conscience. Annie looked at her mother. Jonathan was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, I know. Marcus said something similar. Marcus sounds sensible. He is. If Annie returns, it will be because she chooses to work, not because your family needs forgiveness standing in the room. I understand. Denise glanced at Annie, then softened only a little. I hope you do. After the call ended, the kitchen felt smaller and safer. Annie stared at the phone. You were hard on him. I was polite. You called him a low bar, and did not raise my voice. That is called restraint. Annie laughed then, a small tired laugh that loosened something in her chest. Denise smiled, but it faded quickly. What do you want to do? Annie touched the watch. She thought of Lily's careful handwriting, of the question about what helps when someone feels stuck. She thought of Eleanor writing a letter to a girl she could not find. She thought of Jonathan's face when he heard his mother's words, and of the fact that regret did not make yesterday disappear. I want to go back once, Annie said. Not forever, just once. On my terms. Denise studied her. Why? To see if the room is different when I walk in knowing I can leave. Her mother nodded slowly. That is a reason. I also want Lily to learn that what happened wasn't normal. Not by everyone pretending it didn't happen, but by people acting differently after. Denise reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then we make sure they act differently. That afternoon, the revised agreement arrived by email. It included every condition Annie had listed. Jonathan's letter to Denise came in a separate attachment. Annie read it first, then handed the phone to her mother. Denise read in silence. At the end, she said, He writes like a man who finally met consequences. Is that good? It's a start. The next tutoring session was scheduled for Friday at 4. When Friday came, Marcus arrived 10 minutes early. Annie saw the town car from the apartment window. Her mother stood beside her, arms crossed. You don't have to do this, Denise said. I know. You call me when you arrive. I will. You call me if anyone breathes wrong. Mom, I'm serious. I know. Denise looked at the watch on Annie's wrist. You sure you want to wear it? Annie fastened the strap. Yes. This time, when she rode through the Whitmore gate, she did not look down at her shoes. Marcus parked by the front entrance, not the side door. He got out and opened her door. At the top of the steps, Jonathan was waiting. No David, no Victoria, no Thomas blocking the hall. Just Jonathan, Lily, and Mrs. Clara standing behind him. Jonathan stepped aside before Annie reached the door. Good afternoon, Miss Williams, he said. Annie looked past him into the house where she had been accused, then back at his face. Good afternoon, Mr. Whitmore. He opened the front door wider. Not as a favor. As an acknowledgement, Annie stepped inside. This time, no one asked about the watch. The first thing Annie noticed was the silence. Not the cold silence from her first day, when everyone seemed to be waiting for her to make a mistake. This silence had been prepared. The house had been made ready for her in a way that felt almost too... The front hall smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. A small vase of yellow tulips sat on the entry table. Her name was written on a place card beside a folder on the console. Miss Annie Williams. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Lily noticed. Mrs. Clara said people should see their names where they're welcome. Clara, standing behind Jonathan, gave a modest shrug. Your grandmother believed that. Jonathan did not rush to explain. That helped. He simply stepped back and let Annie enter without being crowded. Annie crossed the threshold. The watch sat against her wrist, uncovered. She had chosen a simple blue sweater, dark jeans, and the same black flats. Nothing fancy, nothing defensive. She had not dressed to prove she belonged. She had dressed to work. Marcus remained near the door until she glanced back. He gave her a small nod, then stepped outside to wait with the car. Jonathan looked toward the study. Lily has everything set up in the library today. We thought the living room might be. He paused. Annie finished it for him. Too much. Yes, I appreciate that. He nodded. Victoria is upstairs. She thought it best not to interrupt your session unless you wanted to speak with her. I don't, Annie said. Jonathan accepted it without flinching. Understood. Lily picked up her workbook and a sharpened pencil from the entry table. I finished the practice sheet you gave me. You did? All of it, even the ones with fractions. Annie looked at her. That sounds like a serious student. I had motivation. What motivation? I didn't want you to think I only did math when people were apologizing around me. Annie almost laughed. That's fair. They walked toward the library. Jonathan did not follow at first, and Annie noticed that too. On the phone, one of her conditions had been simple. No hovering. Lily needed a tutor, not an audience. Jonathan had listened. The library was warmer than the living room. Built-in shelves covered 2 walls. A round table had been cleared near the window. 2 glasses of water sat there, along with pencils, paper, and a small plate of apple slices. No tea service, no grand gesture, no tray that made Annie feel like a visiting senator. Just enough. Lily sat down. Annie placed her folder on the table and took the chair beside her, not across from her this time. Before we start, Lily said, can I ask one question that is not math? Annie set down her pen. 1. Are you mad at me? Annie looked at the girl carefully. No. Not even a little? No. I was hurt by what happened in your house. That's not the same as being mad at you. Lily nodded, but her face stayed serious. I keep thinking I should have said more. You said more than most adults did. That doesn't make me feel better. It's not supposed to, Annie said gently. Feeling bad is sometimes how your conscience tells you to grow. The trick is not to turn the feeling into a speech about yourself. Lily frowned. What does that mean? It means if someone else gets hurt, don't make their pain about how guilty you feel. Learn from it. Do better faster next time. Lily was quiet for a moment. That's harder than algebra. Most useful things are. They began with the fractions. Lily had done well on the first 5 and then gone off track when the variable appeared on both sides of the equation. Annie showed her how to move one term at a time. Lily listened closely, asking fewer nervous questions than before. After 20 minutes, Jonathan appeared at the open library door. He did not step in. Miss Williams, he said, may I speak with you when the lesson is over? Annie looked at Lily's worksheet, then at him, with Mrs. Clara present. Of course. And after Lily is done? Yes. He stepped away. Lily watched him leave. He practiced that. What? Asking without sounding like he was giving an order. Annie smiled despite herself. Did he? Mrs. Clara made him start over twice. This time Annie did laugh. Softly. The lesson continued for another half hour. Lily solved 3 problems without help and got 1 wrong, then fixed it herself before Annie said anything. That one counts more than the right ones, Annie said. Why? Because you caught your own mistake. Lily wrote that down in the margin. When the hour ended, she closed the workbook with more confidence than she had opened it. Will you come next week? Annie slid the papers into her folder. I haven't decided. Lily nodded, disappointed but respectful. Okay. That doesn't mean no. It means I'm still deciding. I know. I'm trying not to push. You're doing fine. Clara appeared at the door. Mr. Whitmore is in the breakfast room. Marcus is still out front, and I'll stay with you. Annie stood. Her hand touched the watch once, not out of fear, but habit. She followed Clara down the hall to a smaller room with a round table and morning light still lingering in the pale curtains. Jonathan stood when she entered. There were no papers in front of him, no lawyers on speakerphone, no Thomas Reed. Just Jonathan, Clara, and 2 chairs left open. Please sit, Jonathan said, then corrected himself. If you'd like. Annie sat. Clara sat beside the window. Jonathan remained standing for a moment, then seemed to realize that made the room feel uneven. He sat too. I wrote the letter to your mother, he said, but before I give it to you, I wanted to say something without using paper. Annie waited. He folded his hands on the table. I have spent most of my life believing I was a fair man because I did not use ugly words. Yesterday showed me that a person can be unfair in a quiet voice. Clara looked down, but Annie kept her eyes on him. Jonathan continued. When I saw the watch, I turned your need to work into evidence against you. I turned your clothes into evidence. I turned your nervousness into evidence. I did all of that before you had 1 full minute to tell me the truth. Annie's jaw tightened, not because he was wrong, but because he was finally saying it clearly. My mother saw you once and wrote down your courage. I saw you once and questioned your character. His voice roughened. That is not a small failure. No, Annie said. It isn't. He nodded. I don't expect you to make it smaller for me. Good. The answer landed between them, honest and clean. Jonathan reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. but he did not hand it over yet. "This is for your mother. It says what I did. It says what my family did. It says you were right and I was wrong. It also says that if she wants to speak with me directly, I will make myself available at her convenience, not mine." Annie accepted the envelope. "Thank you. There is something else," he said. "Lily asked me last night why I believed the worst so quickly." Annie looked toward the hall, where Lily had gone upstairs. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," Jonathan said, "that I had trained myself to protect property faster than people." Clara's eyes lifted. Annie sat with that sentence. It did not fix anything, but it was not empty. Jonathan leaned back slightly. "I am making changes here. Not announcements. Changes. Thomas will no longer handle household staff concerns without review. Security protocols are being rewritten so no employee, contractor, tutor, cleaner, driver, or guest is treated as suspicious because they seem out of place to someone with more power." Annie listened, cautious. "And David," Jonathan added, "will not be in this house while you are working. That should have been obvious." "It should have. You don't get extra credit for doing the obvious late." "I know." Clara's mouth twitched, but she kept quiet. Jonathan looked at the watch, then quickly back to Annie's face, as if catching himself. "May I ask one thing about my mother?" Annie hesitated. "You can ask. I may not answer." "That is fair." He breathed in. "Was she afraid?" Annie knew which day he meant. She could have answered simply, "Yes." But Eleanor had given her more than a watch. She deserved more than one word. She was shaken, Annie said. "Embarrassed, I think." She kept apologizing to the cashier for causing trouble. But when she talked to me, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was focused. On what? On making sure I knew I had done something good. Jonathan closed his eyes for a second. "She did that," Annie said. "She made me believe it for a long time. Yesterday almost took that away." His eyes opened. "I am sorry," he said. This time Annie did not ask for what. She heard it. She did not forgive him. Not yet. But she heard it. Clara rose quietly. "Marcus is ready whenever you are, Annie." Annie stood. Jonathan stood too, then stopped himself from moving toward her. At the doorway, Annie turned back. "I'll come next week." Jonathan's face changed, but he kept his voice careful. "Thank you. I'm coming for Lily. I understand. And because your mother wrote that the watch might take me where I needed to be." Annie touched the envelope in her hand. "I'm still not sure what that means." Jonathan nodded. "Neither am I. That may be the first thing we agree on." For a brief second, something almost like peace entered the room. Then Annie walked toward the front door, where Marcus waited to take her home. And the watch kept time on her wrist as if it had known all along that justice did not arrive in one grand moment. Sometimes it came back slowly, one honest sentence at a time. The next week, Annie came through the front door again. This time, she did not pause at the threshold. Marcus had driven her from her apartment, and her mother had watched from the window until the car turned the corner. Before Annie left, Denise had handed her a brown paper bag with a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a small note folded into the napkin. "Don't shrink. Don't perform. Just be Annie." Annie had read it twice in the car, then slipped it into the pocket of her coat. At the Whitmore house, Clara opened the door before Jonathan could. Annie suspected that had been planned. Clara greeted her, as if nothing in the world could be more natural than Annie Williams arriving for work. "Good afternoon, Annie." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Bennet." "No Mrs. Bennet today. Clara is fine, if that suits you." Annie looked at the older woman's face. "Clara, then." Jonathan stood a few steps back. "Good afternoon, Miss Williams." "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitmore." He did not ask for more. He did not try to make warmth happen before it was earned. Annie appreciated that more than a speech. Lily came down the stairs with a notebook hugged to her chest. "I finished all 12 problems." "All 12? And I checked them twice." "Sounds serious." "I also wrote down where I got stuck, like you said." "That is even better than getting them all right." Lily smiled. "That sounds like something teachers say when you got some wrong." "It is," Annie said, "but sometimes teachers are right." They went to the library. The same round table had been prepared, but this time there was only water, pencils, and a plate of sliced apples. No flowers with her name. No extra ceremony. The room felt less like it was apologizing and more like it was ready to work. Annie took off her coat and sat beside Lily. The watch showed below her sleeve. Lily noticed, but she did not stare. "Okay," Annie said. "Show me the trouble spots." Lily opened the notebook. Her work was neat, but in the margins, she had written questions in small print. Why does moving the X first help? What if both sides look wrong? How do you know when to stop? Annie touched the last question with her pen. That one belongs to math and to life. Lily leaned closer. How do you know when to stop? When the answer is clear, and you are not just arguing because you don't like it. Lily thought about that. Like Uncle David. Annie paused. Maybe, but be careful. It is easy to notice that in other people and harder to notice in yourself. Do you do it? Yes. Really? Everybody does. Sometimes I keep explaining myself even after I know the person is not listening. That is when I need to stop. Lily wrote that in the margin. Annie watched her. You don't have to write down everything I say. I want to. Why? Lily looked at the door, then back at Annie. Because people in this house remember rules better when they're written down. That was not a child's answer. It came from a child who had been watching adults for too long. Annie softened her voice. Then write this one too. Being quiet is not always being polite. Lily wrote slowly. Being quiet is not always being polite. They worked for nearly 40 minutes. Lily did better when Annie let her explain each step out loud. She got frustrated once and pressed the eraser too hard, tearing a small hole in the paper. I ruined it, Lily said. You damaged paper, Annie said. You did not ruin the lesson. Lily breathed out. You always say it's smaller. What? The problem. Annie smiled. Because most problems are easier to face when we stop giving them extra furniture. Lily laughed at that, a real laugh, quick and surprised. Jonathan appeared near the doorway, but he did not interrupt. Annie saw him from the corner of her eye. He held a mug of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. He stood there for only a second before Lily noticed. Dad, I got the hard one right. Jonathan's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough to show that his daughter's pride had reached him before his business face could stop it. May I see? He asked. Lily looked at Annie first. That small glance mattered. Annie nodded. It's your work. Lily turned the notebook around. Jonathan stepped in, stopping at the edge of the table rather than leaning over her shoulder. I don't know if I remember how to solve this, he said. Lily looked pleased. I can show you. Jonathan sat across from her. Annie stayed where she was, hands folded near her folder. Lily explained the problem slowly, moving terms from one side of the equation to the other. Jonathan listened without rushing her. When she finished, he said, You made that clearer than my old math teacher ever did. Lily smiled. Annie said if you know why you're doing a step, you don't have to memorize fear. Jonathan looked at Annie then. That sounds like good teaching. It works for algebra, Annie said. And other things, Lily added. Jonathan accepted that with a small nod. After a moment, he set the folder on the table. I brought something, but only if now is appropriate. Annie looked at it. What is it? Copies of the policy changes for household staff and contractors. I don't need you to read them now. I only wanted you to know they were made. Annie did not touch the folder yet. Were they made because of me, or because of what happened to me? Jonathan considered the difference. Because of what we did to you. That answer was better. Leave it there, Annie. I'll read it later. He nodded and stood. Of course. Before he left, Lily said, Dad? Yes? Are you going to talk to Uncle David? Jonathan's jaw tightened a little. Yes. When? Tonight. What will you say? Jonathan looked at Annie, then back at his daughter. That he is not welcome in this house until he understands that an apology is not a punishment. Lily seemed to weigh that. Good. Jonathan almost smiled. Anything else? Yes. Don't make Annie explain it again. Annie looked down before Lily could see the emotion on her face. Jonathan's voice lowered. I won't. When he left, the library felt different. Not free of the past, but less trapped by it. Lily turned back to the notebook. Can I ask something else? One more non-math question. Do you hate him? Annie knew who she meant. No. Do you like him? Not yet. Lily nodded as if that was fair. Can both be true. Most things in life are more than one thing. My dad did something bad, but he's not all bad. Yes. Uncle David did something bad too. Yes. But he still thinks he didn't. That makes it harder. Lily looked toward the door. What do you do with people who won't learn? Annie thought of all the adults who had disappointed her, teachers who assumed, clerks who followed, neighbors who looked away, men in expensive sweaters who called cruelty a reasonable question. You stop giving them the front seat in your mind, she said. Lily wrote that down too. They returned to the lesson, but the conversation had settled into the walls. Annie could feel it. This was why she had come back, though she had not fully known it before. Not to rescue Jonathan, not to ease Victoria's guilt, not to become a symbol polished and displayed in the Whitmore house. She had come because Lily was still young enough to learn the right thing before pride made the wrong thing comfortable. At the end of the hour, Lily had finished 2 pages. She closed the notebook with satisfaction. Same time next week? She asked. Annie packed her folder slowly. Yes. Lily tried not to look too happy and failed. In the hallway, Clara handed Annie her coat. Your mother called earlier. Annie froze. What? Only to confirm Marcus would drive you home. I told her yes, and that you were doing well. Annie relaxed. She probably wanted to hear a grown woman say it. Clara smiled. Mothers trust, but they verify. That sounds like her. Jonathan came from the breakfast room holding a sealed envelope. Miss Williams. Annie turned. This is for your mother. The letter I mentioned. You may read it again before giving it to her. Annie accepted it. I will. And this, he said, holding out a smaller card, is not an apology. It is information. Direct number to my office, direct number to Clara, and Marcus's number again. Why? So you never have to go through Thomas Reed if something concerns you. Annie took it. Thank you. Jonathan nodded. Then, after a pause, he said, Lily seems lighter after your lessons. She works hard. She talks more after you leave. That's good. It is. He looked toward the staircase. Her mother's death made this house very quiet. Then my mother's death made it quieter. I think I mistook quiet for order. Annie did not know what to say to that, so she said the truth. Quiet can hide a lot. Yes, he said, I'm learning that. Marcus opened the front door, and cool air moved through the hall. Annie stepped outside, then turned back once. Lily stood at the top of the stairs with her notebook in her arms. Annie? Yes? I didn't stay quiet today. Annie smiled. No, you didn't. Lily smiled back. As Annie walked to the car, she touched the watch on her wrist. It no longer felt like proof she needed to carry for other people. Today, it felt more like a reminder for herself. She could return to a hard place without surrendering to it. She could teach a child and still protect her own dignity. She could accept change without pretending the harm had not happened. Marcus closed the car door after her and got behind the wheel. How was it? He asked. Annie looked out at the mansion, then at the envelope for her mother in her lap. Different, she said. Good different or careful different? Both. Marcus nodded and started the car. Both is honest. As they drove through the gate, Annie glanced back only once. This time, the house did not look smaller. It looked less powerful. That was not the same thing. But it was enough for 1 week. By the 4th week, the Whitmore house no longer held its breath when Annie arrived. That did not mean it had become easy. Easy was too clean a word for a place that had once turned her into a suspect before she had opened her folder. But the front door opened for her now without hesitation. Marcus greeted her at the curb. Clara kept a small bowl of peppermints in the entry because Annie had once taken one after a lesson. Lily waited with her notebook open before Annie entered the library. Jonathan still stood back. That, more than anything, told Annie he was trying. He had the habit of filling rooms with his presence, but lately he seemed to be learning how to leave space. He did not hover during lessons. He did not bring up Eleanor unless Annie did. He did not ask whether Annie had forgiven him. He had stopped treating his regret like something she needed to manage. On that Friday, Lily was working on word problems. I hate these, she said, tapping the page with her pencil. They give you a whole paragraph just to ask one thing. People do that too, Annie said. Lily looked up. You always make math sound like a warning. Math is safer than people. At least numbers don't pretend. Lily smiled and read the problem aloud. 2 trains leaving different stations. Different speeds. Same track. Annie listened, then helped her underline what mattered, and cross out what did not. See? Annie said. The paragraph is noisy, but the question is simple. Lily wrote down the equation. Find when they meet. Exactly. Lily worked quietly for a few minutes, then said, "Dad talked to Uncle David." Annie kept her eyes on the page. "Did he?" "Yes. Uncle David isn't coming to Thanksgiving." Annie's pen paused. Thanksgiving was still weeks away. But in families like the Whitmores, holidays were probably planned like business meetings. "How do you feel about that?" Annie asked. Lily shrugged, but it was not casual. "Weird. He's annoying, but he's still family. Both can be true." "I know, you say that a lot. Because people forget it a lot." Lily erased a number. "Dad said Uncle David wanted to come as long as nobody brought up what happened." Annie said nothing. "So Dad said that was the problem." "He said some people want peace to mean nobody names the harm." Annie looked at Lily then. "Your dad said that?" "Yeah. He sounded like you." Annie did not know what to do with that, so she returned to the worksheet. "Your ex is on the wrong side." Lily grinned. "Changing the subject?" "Yes. That's okay. I learned from adults." Annie laughed before she could stop herself. The sound startled both of them, then softened the table. Near the end of the lesson, Clara appeared at the door. "Annie, Mr. Whitmore asked if you could spare 10 minutes after the session. Your mother is already aware. He said you may decline." Annie looked at Lily. "Did he tell you what it's about?" Lily nodded. "Grandma." That was the only answer Annie needed. After the lesson, Clara led Annie not to the breakfast room but to Eleanor's bedroom. The door was open. Jonathan stood inside near the writing desk, with Victoria beside him. On the desk were Eleanor's journal, the rosewood box, and several envelopes tied with the same blue ribbon. Annie stopped at the doorway. Jonathan noticed. "We can talk here, or downstairs." "Here is fine," Annie said. "As long as this isn't about taking anything back." "It isn't." Victoria stepped forward slightly. "Actually, it is the opposite." Annie looked at her. Victoria had changed in small ways since that first day. She still dressed with care. She still carried herself like a woman used to being watched. But when she spoke to Annie now, she did not polish every sentence until it lost its meaning. "I owe you something," Victoria said. "Not another apology. A truth." Annie waited. Victoria looked at the rosewood box. "When I saw that watch, I recognized it from an old photograph. I said that downstairs, but I never explained. I had seen Eleanor wearing it in a picture taken at a charity luncheon. She loved that watch. Everyone knew she loved it. That is why I thought..." She paused. "No. That is why I assumed you could not have it honestly." Annie appreciated the correction. Victoria continued. "After you left the first day, I went through some of the photo albums with Clara. We found something." Jonathan picked up a photograph and handed it to Annie. Annie took it carefully. The picture showed Eleanor outside Harris Pharmacy. Not on the day of the robbery. She looked calmer, dressed in the pale blue coat, one hand resting on the handle of a shopping cart. Beside the photo, tucked into the album sleeve, was a small receipt from the pharmacy dated 2 weeks after the incident. On the back of the photo, Eleanor had written, "Went back to look for Annie. Did not find her. Prayed she got home safely." Annie stared at the words. 2 weeks after, Eleanor had gone back. Her throat tightened. "She looked for me?" Clara nodded. "More than once. She asked me not to tell Jonathan at first. She said he would send a private investigator and turn gratitude into an operation." Jonathan looked down, wounded but accepting. Annie read the sentence again. "Prayed she got home safely." For 2 years, she had thought of Eleanor as the woman she had helped. She had never imagined Eleanor thinking of her after that, driving back to the pharmacy, looking at strangers' faces, hoping to find the girl who had run before the police arrived. Jonathan opened one of the envelopes. "There is more. My mother made a donation in your name, though she only knew you as Annie from Harris Pharmacy. It went to a scholarship fund for students from Southside Public Schools." Annie looked up. "What?" "She couldn't find you," Victoria said. "So she tried to help someone like you." Clara handed Annie a copy of the donation receipt. The amount made Annie's stomach drop. "That's too much," she said automatically. Jonathan's expression softened. "That was your first reaction to the watch, according to my mother's journal." Annie did not smile. "Because it is too much. It was hers to give." That sentence returned the room to the beginning, but now it stood on the other side of truth. Jonathan continued. "The fund still exists. My mother gave once. I have arranged for Whitmore Holdings to fund it annually. With a new name. If you approve. Annie became still. If I approve? Yes. What name? Jonathan held out a paper. The Eleanor Whitmore and Annie Williams Courage Scholarship. Annie took one look and shook her head. No. Jonathan did not argue. All right. Victoria looked surprised, but stayed quiet. Annie handed it back. Not my name. May I ask why? Because I'm not a monument, Annie said. And I'm not letting rich people put my name on something so they can feel better about almost ruining it. Jonathan absorbed that. Clara's eyes lowered with approval. Annie looked at the photograph again. Name it after her, or name it after what she did, but not me. Lily had appeared quietly in the doorway. What about Brave Eyes? Annie turned. What? Lily stepped inside. Grandma called you the girl with brave eyes. It doesn't have to say your name. It can help girls who need someone to see them. No one spoke for a moment. Annie looked at Lily, then at Jonathan. The Brave Eyes Scholarship sounds less like a plaque and more like a promise. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then that will be the name. Not just for girls, Annie said. For students who do the right thing when nobody is rewarding them. Students who help at home. Students who work. Students who are overlooked. Jonathan reached for a pen. Yes, and no publicity using my face. Agreed. No article about the tutor who taught the billionaire a lesson. Victoria almost winced. Agreed. No fundraiser where people clap for themselves because they donated money after feeling guilty. Jonathan looked at her with something close to respect. Then how should it work? Annie thought of her mother's tired hands, her school counselor's crowded office, students she knew who were brilliant but too busy surviving to look impressive on glossy applications. Quietly, she said. Through schools. Counselors. Churches. Community centers. Places where people already know which kids keep showing up, even when life makes it hard. Clara smiled. Eleanor would have liked that. Jonathan wrote it down. Then we will do it quietly. Annie looked at him. You keep saying we. He placed the pen down. You may be as involved or uninvolved as you choose. I will not use your pain to build a project and then ask you to stand beside it. That answer mattered. Lily moved beside Annie and looked at the photograph. Grandma really went back. She did, Annie said. Do you wish she had found you? Annie looked at the older woman in the picture. The pale coat. The careful handwriting. The prayer on the back. Yes, Annie said. But maybe she did. Just later than she wanted. Jonathan's eyes reddened, but he kept himself steady. Victoria turned toward Annie. There is something else I need to say. I told myself I was protecting this family when I accused you, but I was protecting an idea of this family that was never as good as Eleanor wanted it to be. Annie looked at her. What will you do with that? Victoria did not answer quickly. Start by telling the truth in rooms where I used to stay comfortable. Annie nodded. That's harder than apologizing. I know. No, Annie said. You'll know after you do it. Victoria accepted that. Jonathan gathered the papers and placed them back on the desk except for the photograph. This belongs to you, if you want it. Annie stared at the picture. The original? Yes. Don't you want to keep it? I want my mother's gratitude to reach the person she meant it for. Annie took the photograph, but not quickly. She slipped it into her folder beside Eleanor's letter. At the door, Lily touched Annie's sleeve. Same time next week? Annie looked at the room, then at the watch, then at the family trying, unevenly, to become different from the people they had been on her first day. Same time, she said. As Marcus drove her home later, Annie held the photograph in her lap. The city moved past the windows in late autumn colors. Brick. Traffic lights, grocery signs. Yellow leaves gathered near curbs. The watch ticked on her wrist, steady as ever. For the first time, Annie did not hear it as proof. She heard it as a question. Not what did they do to you, but what will you build without letting them own the story? The first Brave Eyes Scholarship was awarded in the spring, in the auditorium of a public high school on the south side. There were no chandeliers, no private caterers, no glossy banners with Whitmore Holdings printed across the top. Annie had insisted on that, and for once Jonathan had not tried to improve the idea until it stopped belonging to the people it was meant to serve. The stage held a wooden podium, a row of folding chairs, and a small table with envelopes stacked beside a vase of yellow tulips. because Clara said Eleanor would have approved. Annie sat in the third row beside her mother. Denise wore her best navy dress and kept one hand on Annie's knee, not because Annie needed steadying, but because mothers sometimes kept a hand where their heart was. Marcus sat 2 seats away, in a dark suit Annie had never seen before, his driver's cap folded in his lap. Clara sat beside him, dabbing at nothing with a tissue before the ceremony even began. Jonathan sat in the front row with Lily and Victoria. He had asked Annie weeks earlier whether she wanted to sit with them. She had said no. Not cruelly, just clearly. "I want the students to see me where I come from," she had told him. He had nodded. "Then that is where you should be." David was not there. Annie did not ask why. The first recipient was a senior named Mariah Coleman, who had spent 2 years helping raise her younger brothers after school, while keeping her grades high enough to earn admission to nursing college. Her counselor introduced her without making poverty sound like entertainment. That had been Annie's condition too. No sad music. No speeches turning struggle into decoration. Just truth, dignity, and a check large enough to matter. Mariah walked onto the stage in a green dress, nervous smile trembling at the corners. When she accepted the envelope, she looked at the audience and said, "I thought people only noticed you after you made it out. Thank you for noticing while I'm still trying." Annie felt her mother's hand tighten. Jonathan bowed his head. After the applause faded, the principal invited Jonathan to speak. He stood, buttoned his jacket, then stopped beside the podium without touching the microphone right away. Months ago, Annie would have expected him to command the room. Now he seemed careful with it. "My mother, Eleanor Whitmore, believed gratitude should move," he said. "Not sit in a drawer, not remain in a family story. Move." He looked toward Annie, then back at the students. "This scholarship exists because my mother once received help from a young woman who owed her nothing. That young woman did the right thing without an audience, without a promise of reward, and without knowing whether anyone would ever thank her properly." Annie looked down at the watch on her wrist. Jonathan continued, "My family almost failed that young woman. I almost failed her. I say that here because money should not buy a cleaner version of the truth." The room went quiet in the way rooms do when people stop simply listening and begin measuring a man's words against his face. He did not look away. "The Brave Eyes Scholarship is not charity from a family that knows better," he said. "It is a debt being paid forward by people who are still learning how to see." When he sat down, no one clapped at first. Then Clara began, soft but firm, and the rest of the auditorium followed. Annie did not clap for him. She clapped for the students. After the ceremony, people gathered in the hallway over paper cups of lemonade and grocery store sheet cake. Lily found Annie near the bulletin board where college acceptance letters were pinned. "I solved the train problem without you," Lily said. Annie smiled. "Both trains? Both trains. No collision? No collision. Then I'm proud." Lily looked pleased, then glanced at the stage doors. "Dad did okay, right?" He told the truth. "That's better than okay?" "Usually." Lily nodded as if adding that to her private notebook. "He still practices before he talks to you. I can tell. He doesn't want to mess up. He will sometimes." "I know," Lily said, "but now he fixes it faster." Annie looked at her then. The girl had grown taller in the months since that first afternoon, or maybe she only stood straighter. She had learned algebra, yes, but also how to ask sharper questions and wait for honest answers. Annie counted that as the better lesson. Victoria approached next, holding 2 paper cups. "Lemonade?" Annie accepted one. "Thank you." Victoria looked toward Mariah, who was taking pictures with her brothers. "You were right about doing it quietly. This feels useful." "Useful is better than impressive," Annie said. Victoria gave a small smile. "I've learned that sentence applies to more than scholarships." They stood together for a moment without strain. Not friendship. Not exactly. But something cleaner than guilt. Jonathan came last. He did not interrupt Annie's conversation with her mother. He waited until Denise gave him the kind of nod that meant he was allowed to step closer. "Mrs. Williams," he said. "Mr. Whitmore." Annie still enjoyed the way her mother could make polite words sound like a background check. Jonathan looked at Annie. "Mariah's counselor asked whether you might speak to some of the younger students next month. Only if you want to. No pressure from me." Annie thought about it. I'll think about it. Good. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and took out a small envelope. Clara found another photograph. I made a copy for myself. The original should be yours. Annie opened it. The photograph was old but clear. Eleanor stood outside Harris Pharmacy in the pale blue coat, one hand raised against the sunlight. Beside the photo was a small handwritten note, copied from the back, still looking for Annie. I hope she knows she mattered. Annie swallowed. Denise read over her shoulder and went very still. Jonathan's voice was low. My mother spent 2 years looking for a way to thank you. I spent one afternoon showing you why she worried she might have to write it down. Annie looked up. I am not asking for forgiveness today, he said. I only wanted you to have that. For a long moment, Annie said nothing. Then she slipped the photograph into her folder beside Eleanor's letter, where it belonged. Thank you, she said. Jonathan nodded and stepped back before gratitude could become another claim. That evening, Marcus drove Annie and Denise home. Denise sat in the back this time, shoes off, purse in her lap, eyes closed but not sleeping. Annie sat up front, watching the south side roll past in the orange light of sunset. You did good today, Marcus said. Annie looked at him. I barely did anything. You stayed in the story without letting them own it. That's not nothing. She smiled faintly. You always talk like a man who should be writing sermons. I leave sermons to people who like standing still. At home, Denise went to bed early before her night shift. Annie sat alone at the kitchen table with the watch, the letter, the photographs, and the scholarship program folded beside her. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator and the radiator clicking near the window. Outside, someone laughed on the sidewalk. A car door shut. A child called for his brother to hurry up. Annie opened Eleanor's letter again, not because she needed proof now, but because some words became steadier each time they were read. I wanted you to carry something that could speak when people refused to hear you. Annie touched the watch. For a long time, she had thought the watch's purpose was to defend her, against suspicion, against wealthy rooms, against people who looked first at her skin, her shoes, her job, and only later at her face. But now she wondered if Eleanor had meant something larger. Maybe the watch had not been given to prove Annie was innocent. Maybe it had been given to remind her that she was never required to become smaller for the comfort of people who needed proof of her worth. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lily. I got an A on the test. Also, I told Uncle David he interrupts people when he's scared of being wrong. Annie stared at the screen, then laughed so suddenly she covered her mouth. Another message came. Dad says I should have phrased it more gently. I said Annie says being quiet is not always being polite. Annie typed back, tell your dad I said congratulations on the A, and maybe apologize to your uncle for the timing, not the truth. Lily replied with 3 laughing emojis and 1 watch emoji. Annie set the phone down. She fastened the watch around her wrist and held it near her ear. The ticking was soft, steady, ordinary. It no longer sounded like a witness giving testimony. It sounded like time moving forward, as it always had, whether people were ready or not. The next morning, Annie would return to homework, bills, bus schedules, and her own college applications. She would still be Denise Williams's daughter, still a tutor, still a young black woman moving through a world that often asked her to explain herself before it welcomed her. But something had changed. Not the whole world. Not even the whole Whitmore family. Enough. A girl had been believed. A mother's gratitude had reached its destination. A child had learned not to stay silent. A powerful man had spoken the truth in public without polishing it first. A scholarship would find students while they were still trying. Annie looked at the photograph of Eleanor and whispered, I got where I needed to be. Then she turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, the watch kept ticking. Not loudly. Not for anyone's applause. Just faithfully. Against her wrist. Carrying time forward. One honest second at a time. The lesson of this story is that we should never judge a person by their clothes, their job, their race, or the place they come from. Annie was accused before anyone truly listened to her, simply because people with power believed their assumptions more than her truth. But the story reminds us that dignity does not belong only to the rich, and honesty does not need expensive proof to be real. Sometimes justice begins when one person refuses to stay silent, and healing begins when those who were wrong are brave enough to admit it. Most of all, the story teaches us to see people fully, before we decide who they are. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.